I had not even stepped out of my car when my mother-in-law tossed my favorite vintage suitcase into the wet Appalachian mud. She loudly announced to the neighborhood that I was being evicted from my own home to make room for my husband's pregnant mistress. But she had no idea the sealed envelope sitting on my passenger seat was about to leave her out on the street. Before I share exactly how I dismantled their stolen lives, let me know your age in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe to Sarah Told Stories if you believe toxic people always get what they deserve. My name is Abigail and I am 32 years old. The crisp October wind whipped through the forested hills of Morgantown, West Virginia, carrying the sharp scent of pine and freezing rain. I shifted my vehicle into park at the base of my winding gravel driveway. Through the wet windshield, a surreal domestic theater unfolded. My blouses, tailored work trousers, and a heavy winter coat were scattered across the damp, dying grass. Standing on the wraparound porch of the estate I purchased 3 years prior was Gail. My mother-in-law wore a triumphant sneer with her arms crossed tight against her chest. She kicked a pair of my leather boots down the wooden steps. "This house is not yours anymore," Gail shouted, her shrill voice echoing off the timberline. Behind Gail, lurking in the shadows of the porch awning, stood my husband Derek. He owned a local whitewater rafting company built on projecting rugged outdoor bravado. Yet faced with the reality of his betrayal, he looked remarkably small. He refused to meet my gaze, staring intently at the floorboards. "Derek is taking back what belongs to him," Gail announced. "Lindsay is moving in today. She is giving my son the real family he deserves, not a cold corporate suit who cares more about coal leases than giving me a grandchild." I am an energy lease contract analyst. I spend my days dissecting 100-page mineral rights agreements, hunting down hidden liabilities for conglomerates. My profession requires a lethal attention to detail. I do not panic. I analyze. I isolate the variable, and I neutralize the threat. I picked up the heavy envelope resting on the passenger seat. I opened the car door and stepped into the freezing drizzle. My heels crunched deliberately against the gravel as I bypassed my ruined suitcase sinking into the mud. "You have a lot of nerve showing your face here," Gail sneered, stepping forward to physically block the front door. "We already packed your trash. Take it and go back to renting a cheap apartment downtown." "Derek," I said, my voice eerily calm, cutting through the damp air. "Look at me." He flinched his shoulders, drawing up toward his ears. "Lindsay is pregnant," Derek muttered, his voice barely a raspy whisper. "I am sorry, Abigail, but the rafting business has been tight this season, and we need the space. My lawyer said since I pay the utility bills, I have established primary domain. You cannot fight this." Before I could dismantle his profound legal ignorance, a white delivery van, belonging to a private local courier, parked directly behind my car. A young man hopped out holding a digital clipboard. He verified my name, handed me a secondary envelope, and jogged back to his van. "What is that?" Gail demanded, pointing a trembling finger at the paperwork. "You are trespassing on my son's property." I broke the seal on the courier envelope and withdrew a crisp official document bearing the raised seal of the West Virginia County Clerk. I walked up the wooden steps, forcing Gail to take a hesitant step backward. "You mentioned Derek's lawyer advised him on primary domain," I stated, keeping my tone perfectly level. "Paying utility bills does not grant you ownership of an asset. A deed does." I held the document up, ensuring the bold, capitalized legal heading was clearly visible. "This is a finalized quitclaim deed," I explained, articulating every word with surgical precision. "It was executed and recorded at 8 this morning. It supersedes any prior claim, removes any secondary names, and establishes undisputed legal ownership." Derek stepped out from the shadows, his brow furrowing as he squinted at the paper. The color drained from his cheeks with terrifying speed. "It only has your name on it," Derek choked out, his voice cracking. "How is my name gone?" "Because this house was never yours, Derek," I replied, echoing Gail's earlier insult right back at them. "And as of this morning, the county officially recognizes me as the sole exclusive owner of this estate." I folded the deed and slipped it back into the envelope. "I am going to walk through that front door now. You have exactly 3 minutes to gather your mother, walk down this driveway, and vacate my property. If you are still standing on this porch when that timer expires, I will call the sheriff and press formal charges for criminal trespassing." Derek grabbed his mother's arm, his grip desperate and tight. "Mom, stop," Derek whispered urgently, pulling Gail away from the doorway. "We have to go, right now." He dragged his protesting mother down the wooden steps, marching straight past the muddy suitcase he had thrown out just moments before. I stepped over the threshold, pulling the heavy oak door shut behind me. The deadbolt clicked into place with a definitive, echoing snap. The heavy oak front door was sealed, but my sanctuary lasted less than 10 seconds. The sharp rattle of brass echoed from the rear of the kitchen. I turned just as the mudroom door swung inward. Derek possessed a hidden spare key kept under the rusted iron planter. He stumbled over the threshold, tracking wet dirt onto the pristine hardwood floor. His broad shoulders hunched, and his breath came in short, erratic bursts. The rugged river guide persona he utilized to charm tourists was entirely gone. He looked like a cornered animal realizing the trap had already snapped shut. "Abigail, wait," he pleaded, holding his hands up in a gesture of pathetic surrender. "You need to let me explain. My mother took things too far on the porch. We can figure this out like adults." I stood motionless near the marble kitchen island. I did not cross my arms or raise my voice. I simply observed the sweat forming on his temples, despite the chilling October draft creeping in through the open doorway. "You were going to let me come home to an empty house, Derek?" I stated, keeping my tone flat and clinical. "You packed my clothing in garbage bags and vintage luggage. You stood on the porch while your mother announced my eviction to the neighborhood. There is no misunderstanding to figure out. You orchestrated a hostile takeover of my primary residence." "I was just trying to secure a future for Lindsay," he stammered, his eyes darting frantically around the kitchen as if searching for a script. "She needs stability. We were going to send you a check for your half of the equity once the new mortgage cleared. I promise, Abigail, I would never leave you destitute." He was lying. The mechanical ease of his deception might have worked on someone else, but my entire existence was forged in environments where overlooking a single detail meant ruin. I grew up deep in the jagged hills of McDowell County, a place where the Appalachian coal mines dictated whether families ate or starved. I spent my childhood watching my father, a dedicated miner, cough up black dust while sitting at our scratched kitchen table. I watched corporate energy bosses hand him dense contracts filled with tiny print. My father signed those papers because he trusted their handshakes. He never realized those buried clauses stripped him of his healthcare benefits and injury compensation until his lungs gave out. I held his hand in the hospital and made a silent vow. I promised myself I would never be exploited by a hidden paragraph. I learned to read every single line. I became a forensic auditor to hunt down the exact type of corporate deception that destroyed my family. Derek assumed my quiet nature meant I was oblivious to his maneuvers. He forgot that I dissect complex energy leases for a living. "You were never going to send me a check," I replied, my gaze locked onto his shifting eyes. 14 days ago, I received a routine automated alert regarding our property tax escrow account. The routing number listed on the digital statement ended in a 7 instead of a 3. It was a minuscule discrepancy. A normal person would have dismissed it as a typographical error. I do not dismiss errors. Derek swallowed hard, his throat bobbing nervously. "I traced that routing number," I continued, taking a slow, deliberate step toward him. "It did not belong to our joint mortgage lender. It led directly to a newly registered commercial holding entity. The entity was titled under an LLC managed exclusively by Lindsay. You did not just apply for a new mortgage, Derek. You initiated a secret cash-out refinance intended to drain hundreds of thousands of dollars in equity from this property. Your ultimate goal was to seamlessly transfer the title to your pregnant girlfriend and leave me holding the original debt." "That is insane," he choked out, gripping the edge of the kitchen counter. "The bank would never allow a title transfer without your physical signature. We are legally married." I nodded slowly, acknowledging his rare moment of factual accuracy. "You are correct. The bank required my physical signature in front of a licensed professional. That is exactly why you hired Todd." The mention of his lead river guide caused Derek to physically stumble backward. Todd was a loyal employee who had recently obtained his notary public commission online. He was young, eager to please his boss, and profoundly ignorant of the law. "Todd stamped his official seal on a forged document, Derek," I stated, my voice dropping to a freezing whisper. "He verified a signature I never wrote. He facilitated real estate fraud." I did not just intercept the fraudulent escrow transfer. I drove to Todd's apartment last Tuesday. I brought Elias, my lead corporate litigator. We sat in his living room and clearly outlined the federal penalties for participating in real estate forgery and wire fraud. We explained that he would spend the next decade in a federal penitentiary. Todd lasted exactly 4 minutes before he shattered. He surrendered the original forged documents and signed a sworn affidavit detailing your specific instructions to execute the fraud. Derek stared at me, his jaw slack. The false confidence had evaporated, leaving only stark terror. "If you had the affidavit, why did you not call the police?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Why am I not in handcuffs?" "Because a messy public trial over real estate forgery would tie up my assets in court for years," I explained. "I preferred a cleaner transition. I instructed Elias to draft the quitclaim deed, removing you from the title of this estate entirely. I needed your signature to finalize the transfer, but I knew you would fight it if I presented it directly." "Then how did you get it?" he demanded, his hand shaking visibly. "I never signed a quitclaim." I smiled, a thin, predatory expression that held zero warmth. "3 days ago, I brought a stack of standard forestry permit renewals to your office for your rafting company. I told you the state required updated signatures for your upcoming spring routes. You were so distracted texting Lindsay about furniture for this house that you did not even bother to read the pages. You just blindly signed wherever the yellow sticky notes indicated. I slipped the quitclaim deed right into the middle of the stack. You signed away your half of this house to keep me from sending you and Todd to a federal prison." "You tricked me," he yelled, taking a fierce step forward. "You hid a legal document in a pile of permits. That is invalid. I will tell the judge you deceived me." "You are welcome to try," I replied, not retreating an inch. "You can stand in front of a judge and explain that you accidentally signed the deed while actively attempting to execute a fraudulent refinance using a forged signature. Let us see which crime the court finds more compelling." The heavy thud of footsteps interrupted his panic. Gail pushed her way through the open mudroom door, her damp trench coat dripping onto the tile. She had grown tired of waiting in the rain and decided to force her way inside to rescue her son. "Do not listen to her, Derek," Gail shrieked, pointing a wet finger at my face. "She is bluffing. She is just a bitter woman trying to steal what you built. We are going to call our own lawyer and have her thrown out." I did not engage with her delusional rant. I calmly walked over to the banister where Gail had hung her second dry coat earlier that morning. I grabbed the expensive fabric, walked directly over to her, and forcefully shoved the coat into her chest. She gasped, stumbling backward under the sudden physical momentum. I kept moving, using my body weight to herd both Derek and Gail backward through the narrow mudroom. They were too stunned to mount a coordinated resistance. Derek tried to plant his boots, but I pushed Gail directly into him, forcing them both over the threshold and out into the freezing rain. "You have zero leverage, Derek," I stated, standing in the doorway. "If you ever try to enter this property again, I will hand Todd's sworn affidavit directly to the district attorney." I slammed the heavy side door shut. I engaged the deadbolt, the chain, and the electronic keypad lock in rapid succession. Outside, Gail began pounding her fists against the reinforced glass, screaming muffled insults into the storm. I stood in the quiet warmth of my kitchen, watching their distorted silhouettes through the rain-streaked panes until they finally gave up and walked down the driveway. The immediate threat was neutralized. I had successfully secured my home and repelled the domestic invasion. A wave of profound satisfaction washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by the cold, creeping sensation of a much darker reality. I walked over to the kitchen island and looked down at a stack of Derek's discarded business mail. He had risked a decade in federal prison to steal hundreds of thousands of dollars in house equity. A man running a seemingly prosperous outdoor tourism company does not resort to felony forgery unless he is drowning in a catastrophic unseen debt. Derek was desperate for liquid cash, the kind of desperate that drives a man to burn his own life to the ground. If he was willing to steal from his wife, what else was he desperately hiding inside the shadows of his whitewater empire? The silence of the house settled around me, heavy and thick, replacing the chaotic shouting that had filled the front yard just moments before. For a brief second, standing alone in the grand foyer, the weight of the betrayal threatened to crack my ribs. I had spent years building a life with a man who viewed me as nothing more than an expendable asset. I could have collapsed onto the hardwood floor and wept for the marriage I lost. Grief is a predictable human reaction, but I do not afford myself the luxury of predictable reactions. I walked into the kitchen, brewed a pot of dark roast coffee, and carried a steaming mug into my home office. I locked the solid oak door, sat in my ergonomic leather chair, and shed the persona of a heartbroken wife. The analytical machine woke up. I flipped open my encrypted laptop, letting the screen cast a cool blue glow across my face. I needed to understand the exact anatomy of Derek's financial treason. His company, Mountain Rapids Adventures, was the crown jewel of the local tourism sector. Whitewater rafting brought thousands of thrill-seekers to West Virginia every spring and summer, eager to conquer the treacherous currents of the New River Gorge. On the surface, his enterprise projected undeniable prosperity. He sponsored local forestry events, drove a pristine custom truck, and boasted about record-breaking bookings at every community dinner. I bypassed the public-facing ledger he presented to his investors. I did not care about his glossy marketing budgets or his polished tax returns. I wanted the raw, unedited transaction logs. Because I shared a residential network with him for years, penetrating his digital filing system required minimal effort. He used predictable passwords centered around his favorite hunting trips and birth dates. Once inside his administrative server, I initiated a tracing macro designed to hunt for structured anomalies within his corporate cash flow. I sat back and watched the software process the data. When the results populated on my dual monitors a few minutes later, a chilling story unfolded in stark black text. Derek was running a shadow ledger. He had established a systematic draining protocol, siphoning cash out of the primary operational accounts in calculated increments. The withdrawals were intentionally kept under the $10,000 federal reporting threshold to avoid triggering automated banking alerts. I mapped the destination of these structured transfers. The money flowed through a third-party digital payment processor and landed securely in a holding account registered to an entity named River Peak Properties. I queried the state corporate registry. River Peak Properties was a limited liability company managed exclusively by his pregnant girlfriend, Lindsay. I pulled the property records linked to her newly formed company. The stolen capital was funding a sprawling, high-end condominium in downtown Charleston. He was paying for imported Italian marble countertops, a custom nursery, and exorbitant monthly association fees, using the profits from his mountain tourism business. He had constructed a luxurious parallel universe for his mistress, while looking me in the eye and telling me we needed to delay starting our own family because the rafting business required too much overhead. The emotional sting of his secret life faded rapidly, eclipsed by a glaring mathematical anomaly. The numbers staring back at me simply did not align. The Appalachian whitewater season is notoriously short, peaking heavily in the warm summer months and dying off completely by late autumn. The revenue generated by his fleet of rafts and seasonal guides was substantial, but it could not sustain the sheer volume of cash he was diverting to Charleston. He was bleeding hundreds of thousands of dollars, yet Mountain Rapids Adventures continued to operate without bouncing vendor checks. He was paying for specialized river equipment, shuttle buses, and high-risk liability insurance premiums. The capital keeping his hollow empire afloat had to be originating from an external, undocumented source. I leaned forward, staring at the flashing cursor on the screen. My mind raced through every conversation we had over the past year, hunting for a discarded clue. A distinct memory surfaced, sharp and undeniable. 4 months ago, Derek came home furious, slamming his keys onto the kitchen counter. He poured himself a tall glass of bourbon and paced the floor, bitterly complaining about his river guides. He called them ungrateful and greedy, ranting about how they were constantly demanding their paychecks and threatening to walk off the job mid-season. At the time, I assumed he was just venting the standard frustrations of small business management. But looking at the hollowed-out financial infrastructure of his company, that memory took on a sinister, chilling resonance. If the business was thriving, why were his employees begging for their earned wages? That specific complaint hinted at a profound systemic rot festering inside his payroll department. I pushed the payroll anomaly aside for the moment and focused entirely on the debt column. If the business was operating at a severe deficit to fund Lindsay's condo, Derek had to be leveraging a colossal external line of credit. I opened his liability schedules, expecting to find a maxed-out corporate credit card or a standard commercial bank loan. What I found made my blood run cold. 8 months ago, Derek secured an enormous injection of capital. It was not a traditional loan from a reputable local bank. The creditor listed on the digital contract was a private equity syndicate operating out of a neighboring state. In my line of work, I recognized their name instantly. They were a shadow lender, notorious for trapping desperate energy sector startups and rural businesses in predatory debt spirals. The principal amount borrowed was staggering, but the true horror was buried deep in the guarantor schedule. Shadow lenders do not hand over millions of dollars to a seasonal tourism company without an ironclad guarantee. They demand pristine collateral. Derek did not have the credit score or the verifiable assets to secure a fraction of that money on his own. I zoomed in on the scanned signature page of the loan agreement. Staring back at me, scrawled in black ink, was my own name. Derek had forged my signature again. He did not just use a corrupt notary to try and steal the equity in my home. He had actively weaponized my flawless financial identity, my decade of impeccable credit history, and my high-earning corporate salary to co-sign a predatory commercial loan. He pledged my future earnings as the ultimate safety net for his collapsing Whitewater empire. The betrayal was breathtaking in its scope. The man I married had not just cheated on a devoted wife. He had orchestrated high-level corporate fraud, transforming me into the unwitting sponsor of his treacherous double life. I closed the liability document, a terrifying clarity settling over my thoughts. Derek thought he had outsmarted a naive mountain girl. He had no idea he just handed a seasoned contract auditor the exact blueprint needed to orchestrate his total financial ruin. I reached for my phone to call Elias, my lead corporate litigator, to prepare the initial defensive filings. Before my fingers could unlock the screen, a notification popped up from my primary banking application. A scheduled automatic payment for my home security system had just been declined due to insufficient funds. I frowned, knowing my personal checking account held more than enough capital to cover a minor utility bill. I opened the banking app and the screen flashed a bright red error message. My available balance read 0. The war had just escalated, and Derek had fired the next shot. The morning air in Morgantown carried the sharp, biting chill of late autumn, sweeping down from the heavily forested ridges and settling over the Monongahela River. I stood inside a small, independent coffee shop near the courthouse, the scent of roasted espresso beans masking the faint, metallic smell of impending rain. I slid my primary debit card across the wooden counter to pay for a simple black coffee. The barista, a college student wearing a faded flannel shirt, swiped the plastic through the terminal. A harsh, dissonant chime echoed from the machine. "Declined," the barista murmured, offering a sympathetic grimace. She tried the chip reader again. The same jarring tone rang out. I retrieved a secondary credit card from my wallet and handed it over. The terminal rejected it instantly. A cold, precise sensation traveled down my spine. The barista looked uncomfortable, ready to offer the coffee on the house, but I shook my head, thanked her quietly, and walked out into the brisk wind empty-handed. I did not panic. A sudden, synchronized failure across multiple financial institutions is never a technical glitch. It is a targeted strike. I slid into the driver's seat of my vehicle, locked the doors, and dialed Elias. My corporate litigator answered on the second ring, the background noise of his downtown office filtering through the speaker. "Check the county docket," I instructed, my tone flat and clinical. Someone just severed my access to the marital accounts. I listened to the rapid, rhythmic clacking of his keyboard. A heavy sigh crackled over the line. "They bypassed the standard queue," Elias stated, his voice laced with professional disgust. "An ex-parte injunction was filed at the opening bell. Your primary checking, savings, and joint credit lines are frozen, pending a full hearing." West Virginia mountain towns operate on a distinct, predictable rhythm of familial favors and unspoken alliances. The local legal system is often a tangled web of nepotism. I processed the variables. Gail's older brother managed the county clerk's office. He had clearly intercepted Derek's petition, walking it past the scheduling clerks and placing it directly onto the polished desk of Judge Clayton. Judge Clayton and Derek shared a remote hunting cabin every November. They drank bourbon together and traded favors beneath the radar of judicial oversight. "What is the stated cause for the freeze?" I asked. watching the autumn leaves scatter across my windshield. The petition alleges you are experiencing a severe psychological break, Elias read from the digital file. Derek claims your decision to throw his mother's belongings onto the lawn was an act of erratic, dangerous behavior. He told the court he fears you will liquidate joint assets in a manic state. The judge signed the freeze to prevent financial dissipation. It was a primitive, predictable maneuver. Derek was attempting to starve me out. He believed that cutting off my grocery money would force me into submission, driving me to his doorstep in tears. My phone vibrated against my thigh. A text message illuminated the screen. The sender was Derek. "I hear your cards are bouncing," the message read. "Sign the quitclaim deed over to Lindsay's holding company, and I will have the judge release your funds. Do not make this harder than it has to be." He was hiding behind a stolen gavel, projecting false strength from a safe distance. I did not type a reply. A predator relies on the thrashing of its prey to confirm the snare is secure. I intended to give him the exact illusion of a desperate struggle. I started the engine and drove away from the coffee shop, executing a brilliant, calculated diversion. I did not drive to the courthouse to plead my case. I drove my late-model, pristine SUV directly to a sprawling used auto dealership on the edge of town. I sat across a scratched laminate desk from a bewildered salesman and traded my expensive vehicle for a modest cash sum and a worn 10-year-old sedan. The heater rattled, and the upholstery smelled faintly of old smoke, but it served my purpose flawlessly. I drove the aging sedan back to my estate and parked it prominently at the bottom of the driveway, ensuring Mrs. Gable and the rest of the neighborhood watch had a clear view. Inside my home, I logged onto my computer and systematically canceled my landscaping service, my premium cable package, and my gym membership. I wanted the grass to grow a fraction too long. I wanted the illusion of poverty to seep out of my pores. Within 48 hours, the local gossip mill fed the information straight back to Derek. The whispers confirmed his strategy was working. He believed I was liquidating personal items just to keep the lights on. He thought I was breaking. He possessed zero comprehension of my actual financial architecture. 5 years ago, I led a grueling, high-stakes audit on a lucrative natural gas pipeline project traversing the Marcellus Shale. My forensic work uncovered a massive discrepancy that saved the energy conglomerate millions. In return, I received substantial performance bonuses. Recognizing the inherent volatility of both the Appalachian energy sector and my own marriage, I refused to commingle those funds. I established an irrevocable blind trust named Appalachian Holdings. Operating through an insulated proxy firm in Delaware, the trust held my true net worth, safely shielded behind layers of corporate privacy laws. The frozen checking account Derek was holding hostage contained mere pocket change compared to my actual capital. I was a millionaire playing the role of a destitute housewife. I was financially invincible. With my decoy deployed, I turned my analytical focus toward Judge Clayton. A seasoned magistrate does not issue a unilateral freeze on a spouse's assets based on a flimsy, unverified petition unless there is a deeper, hidden incentive. Men in power rarely risk their robes for simple friendship. There is always a financial thread. I locked my office door, opened my encrypted laptop, and initiated a forensic trace on the judge's public financial disclosures. I cross-referenced his stated assets with the shadow ledger I had extracted from Derek's whitewater rafting business. The digital hunt required extreme patience, filtering through layers of legitimate transactions to find the hidden current. Numbers, unlike people, never lie. I bypassed a series of innocuous mutual funds and zeroed in on a blind holding company registered to a post office box just outside of Morgantown. I tracked the routing data linked to that box, watching the quiet, steady flow of capital. The holding company was receiving quarterly dividend payouts directly from the operational accounts of Mountain Rapids Adventures. The puzzle pieces snapped together with terrifying clarity. Judge Clayton was a silent investor in Derek's tourism enterprise. Issuing a legal injunction to protect the assets of a company in which he held a secret financial stake was a staggering violation of judicial ethics. He had weaponized his bench to protect his own wallet, assuming no one would ever look closely enough at a standard domestic dispute to uncover his corruption. I meticulously compiled the transaction logs, the routing data, and the state corporate registry files. I encrypted the dossier and locked it away in a secure cloud server. I did not send the evidence to the Judicial Review Board. I needed Clayton to remain on the bench, believing he was untouchable, until Derek's arrogance reached its absolute peak. I would neutralize the judge at the exact moment Derek needed his protection the most. A week passed in quiet tension. My silence deeply frustrated my husband. The illusion of my poverty was not generating the frantic, weeping phone calls he had so confidently anticipated. When starvation tactics fail to break a target, insecure individuals inevitably reach for a much louder weapon. If Derek could not force my submission in the privacy of a frozen bank account, he and Lindsay would try to destroy my reputation in the harsh, unforgiving light of the public square. They realized they needed to isolate me from my community. The digital whispers were about to evolve into a deafening roar. Silence is a mirror. When you offer no reaction to an insecure person, they are forced to look at their own reflection. Derek could not handle the quiet descending over his life. My refusal to panic over the frozen checking accounts stripped him of the power he craved. In a tight-knit Appalachian town where family lineage dictates social standing, there is a secondary weapon utilized when financial starvation fails. They try social excommunication. Infuriated by my icy restraint, Lindsay and Gail launched a coordinated digital assault designed to burn my reputation to ash. Lindsay initiated the strike. She posted a lengthy, tearful video to her social media profiles. She sat on the edge of her luxury Charleston condo sofa, cradling her pregnant belly. She spun a masterful tale of a forbidden romance born out of sheer domestic misery. She painted herself as the warm, maternal savior who rescued a hard-working local business owner from a barren, heartless marriage. Gail amplified the narrative with ruthless efficiency. She shared Lindsay's video into every single Morgantown community forum, local church group, and neighborhood watch page. Gail added her own venomous commentary to the posts. She described me as an elitist corporate shark who cared more about auditing coal leases than cooking a hot meal for her husband. She told the town I refused to give Derek a child, prioritizing my career over building a traditional mountain family. They crafted a story where Derek was not a deceitful adulterer who forged real estate documents. He was a tragic hero, driven into the arms of true love by a cruel, unyielding wife. The digital algorithm rewarded their scandal instantly. The posts garnered hundreds of sympathetic reactions. The real-world consequences bled into my daily routine with suffocating speed. Morgantown is a place where generations of families know each other by name. Outsiders are tolerated only until they fall out of favor. I walked into the local hardware store to purchase a replacement air filter for my furnace. The bell above the door chimed, but the usual friendly greeting from the owner never came. He stood behind the register, whispering in hushed tones to a cashier. They both stared at me with open disdain. When I placed the filter on the counter, the owner snatched my cash without a word and tossed the change onto the receipt. He did not hand it back to me. Later that afternoon, I walked past the downtown bakery where Derek and I used to buy Sunday pastries. A group of women I had hosted for summer barbecues sat at a sidewalk table. The moment they saw me approaching, they abruptly stopped talking and looked down at their coffee cups. One of them actually turned her chair to face the brick wall. I checked my phone and discovered I had been removed from the neighborhood group chats and blocked by dozens of mutual acquaintances. They were treating me like a contagion. I did not let my shoulders slump. I walked past the bakery with my head held high, projecting an aura of untouchable confidence. Let them whisper. Let them avert their eyes. The opinions of people who believe Facebook posts over empirical evidence hold zero value in my world. However, the assault did not remain confined to petty neighborhood gossip. Derek realized the cold shoulders at the bakery were not breaking my resolve. He needed to hit the one thing I valued above all else. He targeted my livelihood. 2 days later, I received an urgent calendar invitation from the chief compliance officer at my energy firm. I walked into the glass-walled boardroom to find the director of human resources sitting beside the head of corporate ethics. They did not offer a polite greeting. The compliance officer slid a thick stack of printed emails across the polished table. "We received 4 anonymous complaints this morning, Abigail," the officer stated, his tone tight with concern. "The senders claim you have been accepting under-the-table payments from rival natural gas drillers. They allege you are leaking confidential lease data to sabotage local mining operations." I looked down at the printed complaints. The email addresses were encrypted, but the phrasing was a dead giveaway. The messages used specific whitewater rafting terminology and contained grammatical errors I had corrected in Derek's business proposals for years. Derek had mobilized his river guides and hunting buddies to file fabricated ethical violations against me. In the energy sector, integrity is your only currency. If an auditor is even suspected of corporate espionage, their career is instantly terminated. Their professional license is revoked, and they are blacklisted from the industry. Derek was trying to erase my entire future. I sat down and calmly opened my briefcase. I did not act defensive. I provided the compliance officer with time-stamped access logs, verifying my secure digital footprint. I handed over cross-referenced audit trails, proving my data retention was flawless. I dismantled the anonymous accusations with raw mathematical logic, demonstrating that the supposed leaked information did not even exist within our proprietary servers. The HR director breathed a sigh of relief, but the warning shot had been fired. Derek was playing a highly dangerous game. An hour later, I sat in the downtown office of my corporate litigator, Elias. He paced the length of his expensive Persian rug, holding a tablet displaying Lindsay's viral video. Elias was a predator in a tailored suit. He thrived on tearing apart hostile opponents in a courtroom. He threw the tablet onto his desk with a loud thud. "This is textbook defamation," Elias barked, running a hand through his dark hair. "They are actively trying to destroy your professional licensure. We are filing cease and desist letters this afternoon. We will sue Derek, Lindsay, and Gail for tortious interference, libel, and slander. I will drag them into a deposition and bleed them dry for every single lie they typed." I sat back in the leather guest chair watching Elias burn with righteous legal fury. "No," I said softly. "We are not filing a single lawsuit." Elias stopped pacing and stared at me. "Abigail, they are trying to terminate your career. You cannot just sit back and let them control the narrative." I pointed to the tablet resting on his desk. "Look at the engagement numbers on that video, Elias. Look at the comments praising Lindsay and condemning me. They are intoxicated by the public sympathy. They feel invincible right now. If we send a cease and desist letter, we signal that their strategy is working," I explained, keeping my voice cold and deliberate. "We validate their attack. More importantly, a defamation lawsuit warns them that we are preparing for war. It forces them to hire defense attorneys who might actually demand a look at Derek's financial ledgers. I cannot risk a competent lawyer stumbling onto the shadow accounts before I secure the trap." Elias slowly sat down in his chair, the fury in his eyes shifting into calculating respect. "You want them to keep posting." "I want them loud, proud, and looking in the exact wrong direction," I confirmed. "Every fabricated story they post is a documented piece of malice we can use later. Let them bask in the Facebook validation. Let Derek feel like the king of the mountain. While they are busy monitoring comment sections and celebrating their digital victory, they are ignoring the catastrophic vulnerabilities in their own foundation." Elias steepled his fingers, resting his chin on his hands. "You are buying time. I need quiet, uninterrupted days to locate the ultimate financial execution switch," I stated. "Derek forged my signature on a commercial loan to keep his hollow company afloat. I need to track down the exact private equity syndicate holding that debt. If they are busy planning their next social media post, they are not watching their own bank accounts." Elias nodded, a slow, dangerous grin spreading across his face. "We let them dig their own graves." The digital war raged on for another week. I endured the stares at the grocery store. I ignored the whispers at the gas station. I allowed Derek to believe he had successfully isolated me from the entire world. But a narcissist requires constant physical validation. The dopamine hit of a social media like is fleeting. Derek needed to see me break in person. He needed an audience to witness his perceived dominance over the woman who had locked him out of his own house. The digital confrontation was about to spill into physical reality. The annual Morgantown Forestry Charity Gala was scheduled for the upcoming weekend. It was the premier networking event for the Appalachian energy sector. I had to attend to maintain my corporate relationships. I knew Derek would be there, utilizing his tourism company sponsorship to rub shoulders with local politicians. The trap was moving from the internet to a crowded ballroom, and I was ready to let him make the most expensive mistake of his life. The crystal chandeliers hanging from the vaulted ceiling of the Hotel Morgan ballroom cast a fractured light over the elite circles of Appalachian high society. The annual Morgantown Forestry Charity Gala served as the premier networking event for the regional energy sector. Timber tycoons, coal executives, and natural gas magnates gathered to trade lucrative contracts over glasses of aged bourbon. In my profession, skipping this event amounted to career suicide. I needed to maintain my corporate relationships, ensure my auditing contracts remained secure, and project an aura of unbothered stability. I stepped into the grand foyer wearing a tailored emerald silk gown that served as my armor. The environment was a stark contrast to my upbringing. My father wore a scratched plastic hard hat and heavy steel-toed boots, descending into the dark, suffocating shafts of the southern coal seams to keep our family fed. He traded his health for meager paychecks. I traded in intellectual leverage. I walked through the gilded room with the posture of a woman who owned the building, fully aware that the digital smear campaign had preceded my arrival. The social temperature dropped the moment I handed my coat to the attendant. Conversations at nearby high-top tables halted. Wives of local business owners lowered their champagne flutes and leaned inward, whispering behind manicured hands. The false narrative Lindsay and Gail spun online had saturated the community. To the people in this room, I was the heartless, career-obsessed elitist who had driven a hard-working local outfitter into the arms of a warmer, more maternal woman. I did not avert my gaze. I met their stares with a calm, freezing indifference. Let them whisper. Their opinions were built on fabricated Facebook posts, whereas my reality was built on forensic financial data. I retrieved a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter and turned toward the main exhibition hall. Before I could take 3 steps, a heavy figure intentionally blocked my path. Derek stood directly in front of me, flanked by Lindsay. They had strategically positioned themselves near the grand staircase, a high-traffic choke point guaranteeing an audience. Lindsay wore a tight, pale pink maternity dress, her hand resting performatively on her swollen belly. She cast a triumphant, pitying look in my direction, playing the role of the devoted future mother protecting her new family. Derek looked remarkably out of place among the refined energy executives. He wore a brand-new charcoal suit. My analytical mind instantly appraised the fabric and the cut. It was a bespoke wool blend that retailed for more than his river guides earned in a month. The dramatic irony tasted sweeter than the expensive catered appetizers. Derek was strutting around a high society charity gala, wearing a suit paid for by the hidden, structured withdrawals I had tracked in his shadow ledger. He was wrapped in stolen money, trying to intimidate the exact auditor who was currently hunting down his secret commercial debt. "You have a lot of nerve showing up here tonight," Derek said. His voice carried a practiced, theatrical edge, pitched just loud enough for the lingering guests to hear. I took a slow sip of my water. He stood too close, invading my personal space in a primitive attempt to establish physical dominance. The scent of his cheap cedar cologne mingled poorly with the nervous perspiration beading along his hairline. He was projecting strength, but his dilated pupils and rapid breathing betrayed an intense underlying panic. "I was invited by the board of directors," I replied, my tone flat and conversational. "You are a guest of a minor tourism sponsorship. I suggest you step aside and enjoy the complimentary buffet." Lindsay let out a sharp, dramatic scoff, stepping closer to Derek and linking her arm through his. "She is just bitter, Derek. She knows everyone here sees her for exactly what she is." I ignored Lindsay entirely. A seasoned litigator never engages with the supporting cast when the primary target is standing right in front of them. I kept my eyes locked on Derek, watching the muscle in his jaw twitch. "I am not playing games anymore, Abigail," Derek hissed, leaning in so the scent of his stale breath washed over my face. "My lawyer told me you sold your car and canceled your accounts. You are running out of cash. You are going to transfer the deed to the house into Lindsay's holding company by the end of the week." I remained perfectly still. I did not laugh, nor did I correct his flawed assumption about my financial health. I simply allowed the silence to stretch, forcing him to fill the void with his own arrogant overreach. "And you are going to set up a monthly spousal maintenance payment of $15,000, Derek continued, emboldened by my lack of reaction. "You make more than enough from your precious coal leases to afford it." I studied the bead of sweat tracing a line down his temple. $15,000 a month, I repeated softly, testing the weight of the demand. And if I decline this generous offer? Derek smiled, a cruel, uneven stretching of his lips that failed to reach his eyes. Then I go to the local press. I have friends at the regional newspaper. I will tell them you accept under-the-table kickbacks from rival drilling operations. I will tell them you leak confidential forestry data. By the time the reporters are done digging through the fake ethical complaints my guides filed against you, your firm will fire you. You will lose your auditing license and you will never work in the energy sector again. The whispering crowd around the staircase leaned closer, eager to witness the downfall of the icy corporate analyst. Derek puffed out his chest, thoroughly intoxicated by the illusion of his own power. He believed he had cornered me. He thought the threat of career destruction would force me to open my checkbook and surrender my home. He had no idea that I had already instructed my blind trust to approach the shadow lender holding his toxic $3 million commercial loan. He was threatening to leak fake rumors to a local newspaper while I was preparing to become his primary secured creditor. "You are sweating, Derek," I observed, keeping my voice low and devoid of any emotional inflection. His smug expression faltered. He instinctively reached up to wipe his forehead, a micro-expression of insecurity shattering his dominant facade. "You cornered me in a public venue to demand a $15,000 monthly stipend in exchange for your silence," I stated, ensuring my pronunciation was razor sharp. "You are threatening to fabricate defamatory statements to intentionally sabotage my professional licensure if I do not surrender a piece of real estate." "I do not care what you call it," Derek snapped, dropping his hand back to his side. "It is the cost of doing business. You are going to pay it." "I call it extortion," I corrected him, my gaze piercing straight through his fragile ego. "And under federal law, extortion carries a severe mandatory prison sentence. But you already know a thing or two about federal felonies, don't you?" Derek blinked, his pupils shrinking. The subtle mention of a federal felony was a calculated strike, a psychological seed planted to make him question just how much I truly knew about his stolen payroll taxes. "If you expect me to entertain such a pathetic, desperate fantasy," I continued, stepping smoothly around him, "you should at least have the courage to put your demands in a formal proposal. But we both know you lack the spine to create a paper trail. You prefer to hide behind your mother and your pregnant girlfriend." I did not wait for his response. I walked away, my heels clicking rhythmically against the polished marble floor. I left him standing near the staircase, his face flushed a deep, humiliating crimson. The surrounding guests turned away, pretending to study their drinks, sensing that the rugged outfitter had just been verbally eviscerated. I manipulated his fragile male ego with surgical precision. Derek possessed a volatile temper and a deep-seated need to prove his superiority. Dismissing him as a coward, incapable of creating a paper trail, was the ultimate insult to his pride. I knew he would not be able to let the slight go unanswered. He needed to prove he was unafraid. I left the charity gala an hour later, having successfully secured my corporate relationships and navigated the hostile environment without a single misstep. I drove my modest, aging sedan back to the quiet sanctuary of my estate. The house was dark and silent, a stark contrast to the buzzing ballroom. I poured myself a glass of cold water and set my encrypted laptop on the kitchen island. I did not have to light long. At exactly 2 a.m, a notification chimed in the silent kitchen. An email had arrived in my personal inbox. The sender was Derek. I opened the message, the blue light of the screen reflecting in my eyes. Fueled by bourbon and bruised pride, Derek had typed out a sprawling, highly detailed list of demands. He explicitly demanded the deed to the house and a monthly payment of $15,000. He explicitly stated that if the demands were not met, he would contact specific journalists to publish claims of corporate espionage to ensure my termination. He had typed out the precise legal definition of extortion, signed his name at the bottom, and hit send. I downloaded the email, backed it up to a secure offline server, and forwarded a copy to my corporate litigator. Derek thought he had proven his dominance. In reality, he had just handed me the exact federal evidence I needed to guarantee his future incarceration. The domestic skirmish was officially over. It was time to shift my focus toward the predatory shadow lenders and the $3 million of toxic debt currently attached to my forged signature. I sat across from Elias in his downtown Morgantown office. The morning sun pierced through the blinds, casting long shadows across his mahogany desk. I slid a single printed sheet of paper toward him. It was the email Derek sent at 2 a.m. Elias picked up the paper. His eyes tracked the text, reading the exact legal definition of extortion my husband had foolishly typed out. A slow, dark smile crept onto the litigator face. He tapped his pen against the wood. "You baited him perfectly," Elias noted, his voice low and satisfied. "He demanded $15,000 a month and threatened to sabotage your professional license if you refused. We can hand this to the district attorney today. Derek will be facing a federal indictment before dinner." I shook my head. A criminal indictment is a blunt instrument. It requires a trial. It allows him to play the victim in front of a jury. I do not want a trial, Elias. I want a swift, quiet execution. I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out a much thicker folder. I placed it on the desk. The extortion email is an insurance policy. My primary focus is the liability Derek created when he forged my signature. Elias opened the thick folder. I had spent the weekend decrypting the specific loan documents Derek tried to hide inside his corporate server. He did not secure his funding from a traditional financial institution. Standard banks require extensive due diligence, rigorous audits, and transparent accounting. Derek could not survive that level of scrutiny. He went to the shadows. He utilized an unregulated private equity syndicate operating out of a neighboring state. They specialized in predatory lending within the Appalachian energy and tourism sectors. They target desperate companies starved for cash. The terms of the loan were suicidal. The principal balance was $3 million. The interest rate sat at a staggering 30% compounded monthly. Any traditional business owner would recognize that accepting such a rate is a death sentence. But Derek only cared about maintaining the illusion of success. He needed capital to fund Lindsay and her luxury condominium. I pointed to a specific paragraph highlighted in yellow on the second page. "Look at the default parameters I instructed." Elias adjusted his glasses. They included an immediate acceleration clause he read aloud, his tone sharpening. "If he misses a single payment, the lender can demand the entire $3 million principal within 24 hours. If he fails to produce the cash, they can bypass probate or standard collection delays and seize all listed collateral immediately." "That brings us to the collateral," I said, leaning back in my chair. A private equity syndicate does not lend $3 million to a seasonal whitewater rafting company based on faith. They demand hard, tangible assets. Derek forged my name to pledge the house, but our equity was nowhere near enough to cover the principal. He needed a much larger safety net. I instructed Elias to turn to the final section of the contract. 7 years ago, during a Thanksgiving dinner, Gail drank 3 glasses of wine and held court at my dining table. She boasted loudly about how she had supported her golden child when he first launched his outdoor tourism business. She bragged about driving to his office and signing a stack of blank guarantor forms. She told everyone she trusted her son implicitly and wanted him to have whatever financial backing he needed to succeed. Derek smiled and thanked her that night. He took those blank forms and locked them in a safe. He kept them there for 7 years. When the predatory lenders demanded more collateral, Derek did not hesitate. He weaponized his own mother. He took those signed forms and attached them to the debt schedule. He cross-collateralized the $3 million toxic loan against Gail and her sprawling generational mountain estate. He quietly pledged the roof over her head to secure the cash he needed to impress his mistress. He sold out his own bloodline to buy a few more months of fake prosperity. Elias let out a low whistle, staring at Gail's sweeping cursive signature on the guarantor addendum. "He is a parasite," Elias murmured, closing the folder. "If he defaults on this loan, the syndicate will take his mother property. They will evict her without a second thought." "Exactly," I agreed. "But I do not want an anonymous financial firm taking the profit. I want to hold the leash. The rafting season is over, the rivers are freezing, Derek tourism revenue has flatlined for the winter, and the private equity syndicate knows it. They are looking at a failing company carrying a formidable toxic debt. They are terrified he will declare bankruptcy and force them into a protracted legal battle to seize a residential estate. Shadow lenders hate friction. They want fast liquidity. They want out." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the smooth wood of the desk. I need you to contact the syndicate today, Elias. You will represent Appalachian Holdings. You will not mention my name or my relationship to Derek. You will present my blind trust as an independent corporate entity eager to acquire distressed debt. You will offer to buy the entire $3 million portfolio, including all attached collateral covenants, but you will offer them a fraction of the value. Play hardball. Tell them they can walk away clean today or risk losing everything in a messy Appalachian court battle tomorrow. Elias understood the assignment perfectly. He possessed a ruthless talent for negotiation. He picked up his secure phone and dialed the primary number listed for the syndicate. I sat silently in the guest chair, listening as the transaction unfolded. Elias painted a grim picture of Derek and his failing business. He highlighted the incoming winter season and the depreciating value of the rafting equipment. The executives on the other end of the line were defensive at first. They demanded $2 million. Elias countered with $800,000. The negotiation was a rapid exchange of financial threats and risk assessments. After 40 minutes of relentless haggling, the syndicate caved. They agreed to sell the entire debt portfolio for $1.2 million. Elias hung up the phone and looked across the desk. A triumphant gleam illuminated his eyes. "The paper is yours, Abigail. They are drafting the assignment of debt right now. Appalachian Holdings is about to become the primary secured creditor for Mountain Rapids Adventures." I opened my encrypted laptop and logged into the offshore portal for my blind trust. I initiated the wire transfer of $1.2 million directly to the syndicate. The progress bar loaded quickly. When the screen flashed green confirming the transaction, a profound sense of control washed over me. The private equity firm released their claim. Appalachian Holdings officially owned the $3 million note. I downloaded the newly assigned debt schedules. I was now the legal owner of the lien on the Morgantown estate. More importantly, I was the legal owner of the lien on Gail and her generational mountain home. The power dynamic had shifted so deeply that the shockwave had not even reached them yet. Gail and Derek were currently sitting in their respective homes, believing they held all the leverage. They thought their social media smear campaign was breaking my spirit. They did not understand that corporate debt supersedes everything. Because Mountain Rapids Adventures owed me $3 million, and the collateral securing that debt was their personal property, they were technically already bankrupt. They just had not received the paperwork yet. I looked at the amortization schedule. The next monthly interest payment was due in 5 days. Derek would inevitably default. When the grace period expired, Appalachian Holdings would be legally authorized to trigger the acceleration clause, demanding the entire principal immediately. When Derek failed to produce $3 million in cash, I would execute the collateral seizure. However, a nagging detail remained buried in the transaction logs. Even with the $3 million loan, Derek was still falling short. Funding Lindsay and her expensive lifestyle required an endless stream of capital. The numbers indicated another income source. He was patching the bleeding holes in his ledger with something else, something systemic and highly illegal. I needed to trace the final thread of his financial treason. I opened the payroll accounts for his river guides, preparing to uncover a secret that would transform a civil foreclosure into a severe federal crime. The $3 million commercial note was securely locked within the digital vault of my blind trust. Purchasing the toxic debt provided an unparalleled strategic advantage, giving me the power to foreclose on the very roofs over their heads. Yet a seasoned contract analyst understands that a single unbalanced equation is a glaring warning sign. The cash bleed required to fund a luxury lifestyle in Charleston far exceeded the operational limits of a seasonal tourism outfit, even with a predatory cash injection. The numbers demanded a source of continuous liquid revenue. I turned my attention back to the server, targeting the human element of his operation. I navigated through the labyrinth of digital folders containing employee compensation records. Mountain Rapids Adventures employed dozens of river guides during the peak summer months. These were hard-working locals born and raised in the surrounding hollows. They risked their safety navigating the dangerous Class 5 rapids of the New River Gorge. They relied on those seasonal paychecks to feed their families during the harsh Appalachian winters. I remember Derek pacing across our kitchen floor months ago, nursing a glass of bourbon and complaining bitterly about how greedy his crew had become. He called them ungrateful for demanding their wages on time. That specific grievance echoed in my mind as I filtered the payment histories, isolating the gross pay versus the net disbursements. A standard payroll system automatically deducts state and federal income taxes, Medicare, and Social Security contributions from an employee's gross earnings. The employer holds these funds in a designated tax escrow account and remits them to the Internal Revenue Service on a strict quarterly schedule. I cross-referenced the deductions against the outgoing federal remittances. The column representing the payments to the government was entirely blank. The money never reached Washington. For 3 consecutive years, Derek had authorized the tax deductions on his employees' pay stubs. The guides believed they were contributing to their social safety nets. In reality, Derek intercepted those funds the moment they left the payroll processor. I tracked the diverted capital. The stolen tax withholdings were routed through a maze of dummy vendor invoices. On paper, it looked like the rafting company was purchasing exorbitant amounts of safety gear and waterproof equipment from a third-party supplier. I traced the routing numbers attached to the fictitious supplier. The digital trail bypassed the equipment industry entirely and dumped the stolen cash directly into the real estate holding entity managed by Lindsay. He was systematically robbing the blue-collar workers of his own community to buy imported Italian tile and designer nursery furniture for his pregnant mistress. A profound, icy anger settled deep in my chest. My father had spent 30 years breathing coal dust in the subterranean dark to provide for our family. He trusted the men in tailored suits who calculated his paychecks. He trusted the system. Derek was preying on that exact same vulnerability. He was weaponizing the trust of the local mountain community, exploiting the people who physically built his reputation on the river. Stealing payroll taxes is not a simple accounting error. It is a severe federal felony carrying mandatory minimum prison sentences. The government does not negotiate stolen withholdings. They aggressively pursue the individuals responsible. I spent the next 6 hours compiling a flawless, heavily documented dossier. I captured the digital timestamps of the diverted transactions. I pulled the specific routing numbers linking the dummy vendor to Lindsay's residential property. I mapped the exact chronological flow of the stolen capital. Every page was a nail in his coffin. I formatted the raw data into a comprehensive whistleblower report designed specifically for the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. A federal agent could glance at this binder and secure a grand jury indictment before lunch. I reached for my encrypted phone, preparing to submit the digital file to the federal authorities. My thumb hovered over the send button, but my legal instincts forced me to pause. Corporate predators are slippery. If I dropped the federal hammer tonight, Derek would immediately shift into self-preservation mode. He would hire an aggressive defense attorney and point the finger at a negligent bookkeeper. He would claim he was merely an ignorant outdoorsman who trusted his accounting department to handle the complex tax liabilities. In family court, he would leverage the chaos, arguing that the marital estate should shoulder the burden of the financial penalties. He might even drag my name into the investigation, forcing me to spend years untangling myself from his crimes. I picked up my secure phone and dialed Elias. He answered with the crisp alertness of a man who thrived on late-night corporate warfare. I outlined the mechanics of the payroll theft, detailing the precise routing protocol Derek used to launder the withholdings. Elias let out a sharp, appreciative breath over the speaker. The Internal Revenue Service does not require a lengthy investigation for trust fund recovery penalties, Elias explained, his voice echoing through the silent room. They pierce the corporate veil immediately. They hold the acting executives personally liable for the stolen funds. If we submit this report, Derek will face federal prison and astronomical fines. I informed my attorney that the report would remain locked in my secure server for the time being. I could not leave a single loophole for my husband to exploit. To ensure a pristine, devastating execution, I needed Derek to formally declare himself the sole architect of the company's financial structure. I needed a legally binding document where he explicitly claimed total operational authority and accepted unconditional responsibility for all past, present, and future debts. A standard divorce settlement would not suffice. I required an airtight assumption of liability clause signed in front of witnesses, ratifying his exclusive dominion over the rafting enterprise. Elias immediately grasped the tactical brilliance of the delay. Extracting that level of legal exposure from an opponent requires a delicate psychological manipulation. A man will not voluntarily sign his own financial death warrant unless he believes he is stealing a gold mine. I had to inflate his ego until it eclipsed his rational judgment. Derek and his mother were currently intoxicated by their perceived dominance. They were basking in the success of their social media smear campaign, convinced they had successfully isolated me from the community. They believed their freezing tactics and public defamation had broken my spirit. I told Elias to contact Derek's local counsel in the morning to request an emergency mediation session. I instructed my lawyer to sound frustrated, to project the image of an attorney stuck with a panicked, hysterical client who just wanted to run away. Elias agreed, hanging up the phone to prepare the bait. To spring the trap, I had to become the exact victim they wanted to see. I closed my laptop and walked toward my closet. I bypassed my tailored corporate suits and selected an oversized, worn knit sweater. I pulled my hair into a messy, uneven knot and splashed cold water on my face, scrubbing my eyes until the delicate skin turned red and inflamed. I practiced softening my posture, letting my shoulders slump inward, projecting the image of a terrified, emotionally exhausted woman on the verge of total collapse. I would invite them to the negotiating table. I would offer them a swift, quiet surrender. I would beg them to take the company off my hands, masking the poisoned chalice as a desperate plea for peace. The stage was set for a performance that would permanently alter the trajectory of their lives. Elias placed the call shortly after sunrise. I sat in his polished downtown office, listening to the speakerphone as he spoke to Derek's local counsel, a man named Mitchell. Mitchell was a small-town attorney who built his regional practice on slip-and-fall injury claims and loud, theatrical courtroom bluster. He possessed zero experience in complex corporate litigation, making him the perfect mark. Elias rubbed his temples, projecting the weary, irritated tone of a high-priced litigator saddled with a hysterical client. He told Mitchell I was unraveling. He explained that the relentless local gossip and the coordinated social media attacks had severely compromised my mental health. He painted a picture of a woman terrified of losing her corporate career to fake ethical complaints, a wife so emotionally drained that she was willing to forfeit her marital rights just to make the public humiliation stop. Mitchell swallowed the bait without a single moment of hesitation. The sleazy lawyer practically salivated over the speakerphone, his voice dripping with unearned triumph as he agreed to an emergency mediation session the following morning. To execute the ultimate deception, I had to physically embody the broken woman they so desperately wanted to see. At 9 o'clock the next day, I walked into the sterile, fluorescent-lit conference room of a neutral arbitration center in Morgantown. I did not wear my tailored emerald silk or my sharp stiletto heels. I wore a faded, oversized beige knit sweater that swallowed my frame, making me look fragile and small. I paired it with worn denim jeans and scuffed flat shoes. Before entering the building, I sat in my car and rubbed my eyes until the delicate skin around them turned a patchy, irritated red, simulating hours of frantic weeping. I practiced letting my shoulders curl inward, collapsing my posture to project profound defeat. Elias sat beside me at the long mahogany table, playing his part flawlessly. He kept his distance, reviewing his notes with a stiff, professional detachment, treating me like an annoying burden he simply wanted to process and dismiss. The heavy glass doors swung open 10 minutes late. Derek swaggered into the room, radiating the intoxicating arrogance of a man who believed he had just conquered the world. He wore his bespoke charcoal suit, the fabric pulling slightly across his chest as he puffed himself up. He looked around the sterile room as if inspecting a newly acquired kingdom. Gail followed right on his heels, clutching a designer handbag purchased with stolen whitewater rafting funds. She cast a look of profound disgust in my direction, her chin tilted upward in aristocratic judgment. Mitchell trailed behind them, dropping a disorganized leather briefcase onto the polished table with a loud, obnoxious thud. "Let us make this fast," Mitchell announced, not bothering to offer a polite greeting. My client runs a highly successful outdoor tourism enterprise. He has a booming business to manage and a pregnant partner to support. We are only here because your client begged for a swift resolution. I kept my gaze glued to the scuffed toes of my shoes. I wrapped my arms around my stomach, hugging the oversized sweater tightly against my chest, and allowed my lower lip to quiver. I forced a ragged, uneven breath to escape my throat. Derek pulled out a leather chair and dropped into it, leaning back and resting his ankle casually on his knee. He looked at me, taking in my red eyes and my hunched posture. A cruel, satisfied grin stretched across his face. He had always relied on his rugged charm and local popularity to mask his profound insecurities. Seeing the precise, analytical auditor reduced to a trembling mess fed the darkest corners of his ego. "We are prepared to listen to your surrender," Derek said, his voice dripping with condescension. "But understand this, Abigail. I hold all the cards. The town knows the truth about you now. If you try to drag me through a long, messy divorce, I will make sure those ethical complaints reach the Regional Energy Board. You will be unemployed by Friday." Elias let out a loud, theatrical sigh, pinching the bridge of his nose. "My client is ready to capitulate," Elias stated, sounding thoroughly exhausted. "She recognizes that the public scrutiny is detrimental to her remaining career prospects. We are prepared to waive her right to a forensic corporate discovery phase. We will not pry into the financial ledgers of Mountain Rapids Adventures." Mitchell perked up, his eyes widening. Waiving the discovery phase was a monumental concession in any standard divorce. It meant I was forfeiting my legal right to examine the rafting company's bank accounts, tax returns, or operational revenue. To Derek and his lawyer, it seemed like I was fleeing the battlefield, abandoning my claim to a lucrative business just to escape the social media onslaught. "Furthermore," Elias continued, sliding a thin document across the mahogany table, "she formally waives all claims to future spousal support. She is relinquishing any ownership stake in your tourism company. You retain sole and exclusive rights to the business." Gail let out a short, triumphant laugh, adjusting her posture in the leather chair. "I told you she would fold, Derek," Gail whispered loudly. "She does not have the stamina for real business. She just crunches numbers in a cubicle. Leaving the rafting company alone is the smartest thing she has done all year." Derek uncrossed his legs, leaning forward to inspect the document. The greedy hunger in his eyes was naked and repulsive. He believed he had successfully stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars, financed Lindsay's luxury condominium, and retained his entire hollow empire without a single auditor looking at his shadow ledgers. "I just want this nightmare to end," I whispered, my voice cracking perfectly on the final syllable. I squeezed my eyes shut, letting a single, genuine-looking tear track down my cheek. I looked up at Derek, projecting raw, unadulterated fear. "You ruined my reputation. Your mother turned my neighbors against me. I cannot sleep. I cannot eat. Take your rafting company. Take it all. I just need to know you will never come after me again." Derek smiled, thoroughly intoxicated by my performance. "You brought this on yourself, Abigail. You should have just let me handle the finances. You were always too controlling." I shrank back into my chair, letting my hands shake visibly on top of the mahogany table. "I am terrified of your instability, Derek," I sobbed, lowering my head. "You take huge risks on those rivers. You spend money recklessly. If I walk away and give you the entire business, I need to know I am safe from your mistakes. I need a clean break. If your business fails next season, or if a tourist gets injured on the rapids and sues you, I cannot have those creditors coming after my corporate salary." Mitchell scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "My client runs a highly solvent operation. He does not need your money to survive." "Then put it in writing," Elias interjected, his tone suddenly firm. He pulled a second crisp sheet of legal paper from his folder and placed it squarely in the center of the table. "If my client is surrendering her marital right to corporate discovery and waiving all alimony, she requires an ironclad shield against your future failures. We demand a binding assumption of liabilities clause." Elias tapped his expensive pen against the document. "By signing this, Derek formally assumes 100% legal and financial responsibility for all debts, encumbrances, tax obligations, and commercial loans associated with Mountain Rapids Adventures. This includes all liabilities, whether currently known, pending, or discovered retroactively. You explicitly waive the right to ever contest these debts or seek financial contribution from Abigail. I looked at Derek through my messy, unkempt hair, letting fresh tears pool in my eyes. "Please, Derek," I pleaded, my voice barely a whisper. "It is my only condition. Take the company, but promise me you will never drag me down with your business debts. It is the only way I will ever feel safe signing away my rights." I masked the most lethal corporate maneuver of my entire career as an act of pathetic feminine weakness. I presented a liability clause not as a weapon, but as a flimsy shield constructed by a terrified woman running for her life. I needed him to view the document as proof of my cowardice, rather than the steel cage it truly was. Mitchell picked up the document, his brow furrowing as his eyes scanned the dense legal jargon. The small-town attorney might not have understood the complexities of shadow lending or federal tax evasion, but his basic legal instincts detected the severe, uncompromising nature of the language. The text was aggressive. It left zero room for future negotiation. It legally cemented the signer to every single financial hazard buried within the corporate structure. Mitchell frowned, lowering the paper and turning to his client. "Derek, this language is exceptionally broad. Assuming retroactive liability for unknown debts is a significant risk. We should request a standard financial audit before you agree to a blanket assumption." The silence in the sterile conference room thickened. I held my breath, keeping my eyes fixed on the floor, waiting for the pivotal variable to tip the scales. The trap was laid bare on the mahogany table. The steel jaws were open, hiding the toxic $3 million debt and the stolen federal payroll taxes just beneath the surface. I needed Derek to ignore his lawyer. I needed his monumental, fragile ego to override any lingering sense of caution. The air inside the sterile arbitration room felt stagnant, thick with the scent of stale coffee and impending ruin. Mitchell ran a single finger inside his shirt collar, loosening his cheap silk tie. The local attorney possessed enough survival instinct to recognize a snare, even if he could not see the steel teeth hidden beneath the legal jargon. He leaned close to Derek, lowering his voice into a harsh whisper that carried easily across the polished mahogany table. "Do not sign this yet," Mitchell warned, tapping the crisp white page. "This language is a blank check for disaster. It binds you to every single vendor dispute, pending litigation, or unseen deficit attached to Mountain Rapids Adventures. By waiving discovery, we are operating blind. We need a neutral accountant to verify the ledgers before you accept sole financial responsibility." Derek let out a sharp, mocking scoff. He leaned back in his leather chair, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. He looked at his lawyer with undisguised contempt, viewing the caution as a sign of weakness. To an egomaniac, caution is a direct insult to their perceived brilliance. "I built that tourism company from scratch," Derek boasted, his chest puffing outward. "I know every raft, every paddle, and every dollar that flows through those accounts. There are no unseen deficits. She is just paranoid because she does not understand how real entrepreneurs operate. She lives her life terrified of risk." Gail shifted in her seat, her designer handbag resting on her lap like a hard-won trophy. She reached out and patted Derek's arm, her eyes locked onto my hunched, trembling form with undisguised delight. "Listen to your son, Mitchell," Gail instructed, her tone dripping with Appalachian elitism. "Derek is a visionary. He turned a few rubber boats into the premier outfitter in the state. Abigail is just a glorified calculator. She spends her days reading boring coal leases and jumping at shadows. She cannot handle the pressure of running a true empire, so she is running away. Let her run." Gail offered me a pitying, saccharine smile. "You are doing the right thing, dear. Giving the business back to the men who know how to lead is the smartest decision you have made since you moved to our town." I kept my gaze firmly directed at my scuffed shoes, forcing my shoulders to shake in a rhythm mimicking quiet sobbing. I dug my fingernails into my palms, using the physical sting to ground myself. I needed Derek to feel like a towering giant. A predator only exposes its throat when it believes the prey is already dead. Derek thrived on his mother's endless stream of validation. Her praise acted as an accelerant, burning away whatever minor doubts Mitchell had managed to plant in his mind. "I am not paying for an auditor to tell me what I already know," Derek declared, snatching a heavy brass pen from the center of the table. "She wants a clean break, and I want her out of my hair. I am taking my company back." He pulled the assumption of liabilities contract toward his chest. He did not read the fine print. He did not scan the specific subsections detailing tax obligations or retroactive commercial debt. He only saw a formal surrender drafted by a terrified wife. With a swift, arrogant flourish, Derek dragged the pen across the signature line. The scratching sound of the nib against the premium paper filled the room. The moment the ink settled into the page, Elias moved with practiced predatory fluidity. He slid a second, much thinner document across the smooth wood. "One final administrative detail," Elias murmured, maintaining his bored, frustrated facade. "This is a personal guarantor addendum. Since my client is transferring her marital interest in the business, the state requires the new sole owner to reaffirm any existing collateral pledges securing the company's operational licenses. It simply verifies that you and your listed partners possess the liquidity to maintain the business without relying on my client's credit score." Mitchell opened his mouth to object, reaching for the new page, but Derek waved him off with a flick of his wrist. "It just proves I have the capital to run the show without her," Derek bragged, barely glancing at the bold text. He saw the address of his mother's sprawling, generational mountain estate listed on the collateral schedule. To him, it was merely a bureaucratic formality, a simple restatement of the blank forms Gail had signed years ago to help him secure minor permits. He remained entirely oblivious to the predatory shadow lender waiting in the dark. He had no concept that the toxic private equity loan he secretly took out was now legally welded to his mother's roof by his own hand. Derek signed the addendum. Elias pulled the document back, signing his own name on the witness line, while Mitchell reluctantly did the same. As Elias capped his pen, he subtly tapped the screen of his smartwatch beneath his tailored cuff. It was a prearranged signal, executing an automated protocol we had established the night before. Miles away, in the quiet corridors of the state capitol, an encrypted email bypassed standard filtering systems and landed directly in the high-priority inbox of the State Judicial Ethics Board. The dossier contained flawless, irrefutable transaction logs. It traced the secret dividend payouts flowing from Derek's whitewater rafting enterprise directly into the hidden holding company managed by Judge Clayton. The timing was a masterpiece of corporate warfare. By noon, the Ethics Board would initiate an emergency review, but the immediate fallout struck much faster. A courtesy notification flashed across Judge Clayton's private terminal in his chambers. The corrupt magistrate, realizing his illicit financial ties were exposed, would face instant panic. To salvage his pension and avoid severe federal scrutiny, he would have no choice but to immediately recuse himself from all pending cases involving Derek or Mountain Rapids Adventures. The protective legal shield Derek relied upon, the Appalachian safety net that had frozen my checking accounts and emboldened his extortion, evaporated into thin air the exact moment his signature dried on my contract. Derek was now standing on a battlefield with zero armor, surrounded by enemies he could not even see. Elias carefully gathered the signed documents, tapping their edges against the mahogany to align the pages. He slipped the paperwork securely into his leather briefcase, snapping the brass latches shut with a resounding, definitive click. The sound echoed through the sterile conference room, serving as the final toll of a bell. The trap was locked. The escape routes were barricaded. Derek had formally bound himself to $3 million of crushing debt and staggering federal tax evasion. The tears pooling in my eyes vanished. The fabricated tremor in my hand ceased entirely. I placed my palms flat on the cold granite surface of the table and pushed myself upright. I did not move quickly. I rose with a slow, deliberate grace, uncurling my spine until I stood at my full height. I reached up and pulled the messy hair tie from my head, letting my hair fall neatly into place. I slipped my arms out of the oversized, cheap beige sweater, letting the faded knit fabric drop carelessly onto the floor. Beneath the costume, I wore a sharply tailored, pristine charcoal blazer that radiated corporate authority. My posture snapped back to its natural state, projecting the lethal, uncompromising dominance of a senior contract analyst. The shift in the room's atmosphere was instantaneous and jarring. Gail's triumphant smile froze, her eyes widening as she processed the sudden, stark transformation unfolding across the table. The broken, weeping housewife she had mocked just moments ago was gone, replaced by an apex predator staring back at her with chilling, emotionless calculation. Derek stopped inspecting his expensive watch. He looked up, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. He sensed the drastic drop in temperature. He saw the hard, unforgiving lines of my face and realized the woman standing before him was not retreating. She was preparing to strike. The silence, stretching across the conference room, transformed from a pause into a suffocating vacuum. The discarded, oversized sweater lay on the floor like the shed skin of a harmless creature. Derek stared at the tailored charcoal blazer I now wore. The victorious smirk melted off his face, leaving behind a pale canvas of dawning comprehension. He looked at his mother, seeking the validation that had fueled his arrogance just moments ago. Gail sat frozen with her manicured hands gripping her designer handbag so tightly her knuckles turned a stark bone white. They realized simultaneously that the desperate weeping wife was a meticulously engineered mirage. I did not wait for them to process the visual shock. A contract auditor knows that the moment an opponent questions their surroundings is the exact second you deliver the fatal strike. I nodded to Elias. My corporate litigator did not offer a dramatic speech. He reached into his leather briefcase and produced a thick stack of documents printed on heavy premium paper. He slid the pristine stack across the mahogany surface. The paper stopped precisely in the center of the table, right next to the assumption of liabilities contract Derek had just proudly signed. "What is this?" Derek demanded, his voice stripped of its prior booming confidence. He reached out hesitantly, as if the paper might physically burn his fingers. "That is a formal notice of default," I stated, keeping my tone crystalline and merciless. "It was issued this morning by your primary secured creditor." Mitchell leaned over his client to inspect the legal heading. The small-town attorney frowned, reading the bold text aloud. "Appalachian Holdings." Mitchell looked up, his brow furrowing in confusion. "This is a commercial debt notification. Why are you presenting corporate collection documents during a marital settlement hearing?" "Because I am the Chief Executive Officer of Appalachian Holdings," I replied. My voice cut through the sterile air with absolute lethal precision. "I established that blind trust years ago, using the bonuses I earned dissecting energy leases for massive conglomerates. I designed it to be financially untouchable. While you were busy spreading rumors on social media and freezing my grocery money, my trust was quietly conducting business in the shadows." Derek blinked rapidly, his mind struggling to merge the image of his obedient wife with the architect of a hidden corporate empire. "I do not owe your trust anything," Derek stammered, trying to project strength. "My business runs on its own revenue." "Your business runs on an illusion, Derek," I corrected him. I stood up and paced slowly along the edge of the granite table. "You assumed my quiet demeanor meant I was blind. You assumed I would not notice the structured withdrawals funding Lindsay and her luxury condominium in Charleston. But more importantly, you assumed I would never find the massive toxic commercial loan you secured when your whitewater rafting revenue flatlined." The color vanished entirely from Derek. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound emerged. His breathing grew shallow and erratic. The secret he had risked a decade in federal prison to conceal was sitting exposed under the harsh fluorescent lights. "You bypassed traditional banks because your ledgers were an absolute disaster," I continued, closing the physical distance between us. "You went to a predatory private equity syndicate operating in the unregulated shadows of the energy sector. You took out a $3 million mezzanine loan with a 30% interest rate. You forged my signature to secure the initial cash." Gail gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. $3 million, Gail whispered, staring at her son in pure horror. "Derek, what is she talking about?" "I am talking about a drowning man who sold his soul to buy a few more months of fake prosperity," I answered for him. "But shadow lenders despise friction. When they realized your tourism business was failing, they wanted out. They wanted fast liquidity. So Appalachian Holdings approached them. We offered to buy your entire toxic debt portfolio for pennies on the dollar. The syndicate gladly accepted the cash buyout. As of last week, my blind trust is your sole undisputed primary creditor. I own your financial existence." Mitchell snatched the notice of default from the table, his eyes darting frantically across the paragraphs. He read the assignment of debt clauses and the specific dates. He realized with terrifying clarity that he had just walked his client directly into a corporate slaughterhouse. The payment schedule indicates a massive interest installment was due 3 days ago, Mitchell noted, his voice trembling with professional panic. Yes, I confirmed, stopping directly across from Derek. You missed your payment, Derek. You were so distracted by the charity gala and your extortion attempts that you completely neglected your shadow ledgers. Because you missed the deadline, Appalachian Holdings has officially triggered the acceleration clause. I am demanding the immediate repayment of the entire $3 million principal. Derek stumbled backward, his chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. I do not have $3 million, he choked out, panic finally consuming him entirely. You know I do not have that kind of cash. The season is over. The rivers are freezing. I am completely bankrupt. Gail slammed her hands onto the mahogany table, her Appalachian entitlement flaring up to mask her terror. We will take you to court, Gail shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. You manipulated us. You hid assets during a divorce. We will hire the best litigators in West Virginia and drag this trust through the mud. We will tie this up in litigation for 10 years. You will not see a single dime. Elias let out a low, dark chuckle that silenced her outburst completely. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the polished wood. You cannot fight this in court, Elias stated, his voice echoing with absolute, undisputed authority. You just voluntarily relinquished your right to mount a legal defense. Elias tapped his expensive gold pen against the assumption of liabilities contract Derek had signed just 5 minutes ago. Your son firmly believed he was stealing a highly profitable company from a terrified woman, Elias explained, smiling like an apex predator. His ego demanded absolute control. By signing this specific document, Derek explicitly accepted 100% legal and financial responsibility for all known and unknown debts of Mountain Rapids Adventures. Furthermore, he formally waived his right to ever contest these liabilities. He begged for total ownership, and we happily gave it to him. Mitchell stared at the signature on the page. The local attorney realized the catastrophic magnitude of his failure. He had allowed his client to legally chain himself to a sinking ship while simultaneously surrendering the life rafts. Mitchell did not attempt to argue. He did not offer a counter-motion. The sleazy lawyer simply shoved his scattered papers into his disorganized briefcase, snapping the latches shut with brutal efficiency. I am formally withdrawing as your legal counsel, Mitchell announced, backing away from the table. You lied to me about your financial solvency. You hid a $3 million toxic loan. You exposed my firm to massive civil liability. We have 0 attorney-client privilege remaining. Do not call my office. Mitchell turned and practically sprinted toward the heavy glass doors, abandoning Derek completely. The heavy doors swung shut, sealing the family inside their self-made tomb. Derek sat frozen, staring at the empty space where his lawyer had just been standing. He was entirely isolated. He possessed no legal shield and no financial escape route. He looked up at me, his eyes begging for a mercy he had never once offered me. But the execution was not complete. I turned my attention away from the broken man and locked my gaze entirely onto Gail. She sat shivering in her chair, the arrogant matriarch finally confronting the consequences of raising a fraudulent son. You threw my vintage suitcase onto the wet grass, Gail. I recalled keeping my voice dangerously soft. You stood on my porch and announced my eviction to the entire neighborhood. You told everyone I was losing my home. Gail swallowed hard, unable to hold my stare. That was different, Gail stammered. Derek needed the space for his true family. When Derek realized the house equity was not enough to secure the toxic loan, he needed more leverage. I continued ignoring her pathetic excuse. He needed pristine, unencumbered real estate to offer the shadow lenders. Years ago, you proudly signed blank guarantor forms to help him launch his business. Derek kept those forms. He weaponized them against you. He cross-collateralized his $3 million debt against your sprawling generational mountain estate. Gail stopped breathing. The blood completely drained from her face, leaving her looking like a hollow shell. No, Gail, whispered, shaking her head rapidly. He would never do that to me. I am his mother. He sold you out to fund his mistress, I confirmed, driving the final nail into the coffin. And because you just sat in this room and encouraged him to sign the personal guarantor addendum, you legally validated the lien against your own property in front of witnesses. The shadow lenders held the deed to your roof, but now Appalachian Holdings holds it. I picked up the final sheet of paper from the table and slid it directly in front of her trembling hands. That is a formal notice of foreclosure, I stated my words, echoing with absolute chilling finality. I am the sole secured creditor. You have exactly 48 hours to pack your bags, walk down your muddy driveway, and vacate my property. If you are still standing on that mountain estate when the timer expires, the county sheriffs will physically remove you. The house is mine. Derek buried his face in his hands, sobbing openly in the sterile conference room. Gail collapsed against the table, clutching her chest, as her entire aristocratic Appalachian universe disintegrated into dust. The immediate financial demolition was complete, but their nightmare was only half over. As they wept over their lost real estate, they remained completely oblivious to the federal tripwire waiting for them at their upcoming grand opening. The corporate trap was locked, and the government executioner was already preparing to strike. The grand opening of the new Mountain Rapids Adventures headquarters took place 2 days later, under a bright, unforgiving Appalachian sun. Derek and his pregnant mistress had planned this lavish event months in advance to showcase their expanding outdoor tourism empire. Canceling the catered affair was entirely out of the question. To pull the plug now would signal profound financial distress to his remaining investors and the local energy tycoons he desperately needed to impress. He was trapped in a gilded cage of his own making, forced to smile and pour expensive bourbon while knowing his mother was currently packing her belongings into cardboard boxes under the threat of impending foreclosure. I arrived at the venue 40 minutes after the ribbon-cutting ceremony began. The new facility sat right on the edge of the rushing Whitewater River, a sprawling structure built from reclaimed timber and polished river stone. The air carried the rich scent of catered barbecue, mingling with the damp, earthy aroma of the churning rapids. A bluegrass band played a lively tune on a raised wooden stage, providing a festive soundtrack to a business that was secretly suffocating under the weight of $3 million in toxic debt. I stepped out of my sedan wearing an impeccably tailored navy suit. The sharp, structured lines of my jacket stood in stark contrast to the casual flannel and denim worn by the local crowd. I chose this attire with deliberate intent. My presence was an embodiment of the river itself. For years, Derek believed he was the undisputed master of the chaotic rapids, effortlessly navigating the wild, unpredictable currents of his life. He viewed himself as a rugged force of nature. But I am an energy contract auditor. I do not navigate chaotic currents. I build concrete dams. I am the silent, immovable structure that dictates exactly where the water flows. And today, I was cutting off his supply forever. I walked up the gravel path toward the main deck, my heels crunching softly beneath me. The venue was packed with a local elite of Morgantown. Timber magnates, local politicians, and coal executives mingled near the open bar, holding crystal glasses and exchanging lucrative business cards. Winding through the wealthy crowd were the river guides. These were the blue-collar Appalachian workers who formed the backbone of his enterprise, serving appetizers and clearing empty plates for minimum wage. These were the exact same individuals Derek had weaponized during his digital smear campaign, the people who had shared fabricated stories about my supposed corporate espionage to protect a boss they believed was a local hero. They remained blissfully unaware that the man they defended was actively robbing their federal tax withholdings to buy luxury condominiums. The lively chatter near the entrance faltered the moment I ascended the wooden steps. A hush rippled through the immediate crowd, spreading outward like a drop of ink in a clear glass of water. Guests lowered their drinks, their eyes darting between me and the main stage. The social media war had made my face recognizable to everyone in the county. They expected me to be hiding in shame, shattered by the public defamation and the loss of my marriage. Instead, I stood tall, projecting an aura of undeniable dominance. Derek spotted me from across the deck. He was standing near a towering display of brand-new rafting equipment, holding a microphone. The false bravado melted from his features, leaving a pale, terrified expression. He shoved the microphone into the hands of a bewildered investor and marched toward me, his jaw clenched tight. Lindsay waddled close behind him, her face flushed with sudden indignation. "You have extraordinary nerve showing up here," Derek hissed, stopping just 2 feet away to block my path to the bar. This is a private corporate event. You are trespassing." I looked at him with chilling indifference. "I am simply inspecting my impending real estate acquisition," I replied, my voice smooth and conversational. "When your holding company officially files for bankruptcy next week, I plan to liquidate this timber structure to recoup a fraction of your defaulted loan. I wanted to verify the craftsmanship before I send the appraisers." Lindsay let out a sharp scoff, trying to maintain her triumphant persona in front of the watching guests. "You are delusional," she snapped, pointing a manicured finger at my chest. "Derek owns this company free and clear. You surrendered your rights at the mediation. Security is going to escort you to the highway." I did not even glance at Lindsay. My eyes remained locked on the man who had forged my signature. He knew the truth. He knew the foreclosure clock was ticking down on his mother's mountain estate. He knew the $3 million demand letter was sitting on his desk. "You need to turn around and walk away," Derek demanded, his voice dropping to a panicked whisper so the nearby investors would not hear. "I will call the sheriff. I will tell them you are harassing my guests." I tilted my head, studying the nervous sweat forming on his brow. "You do not need to call law enforcement, Derek. I already handled the invitations." Before he could process the meaning of my words, the crunch of heavy tires echoed from the main access road. The upbeat bluegrass music faltered as the band members stopped playing, their attention drawn to the driveway. 3 sleek, unmarked black SUVs rolled onto the property, kicking up a cloud of pale autumn dust. The vehicles parked in a synchronized tactical formation, blocking the primary exit route. The festive atmosphere evaporated, replaced by a profound, suffocating dread. The local tycoons and politicians took cautious steps backward, their self-preservation instincts kicking in. The doors of the SUVs opened simultaneously. 8 individuals wearing tactical windbreakers stepped out into the crisp mountain air. Emblazoned across the back of their dark jackets were the unmistakable yellow letters of the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. They did not stroll. They moved with a swift, coordinated purpose, marching directly up the wooden steps of the headquarters. Derek stopped breathing. He stumbled backward, his shoulder colliding with a towering stack of life jackets. The color drained entirely from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. The lead federal agent, a tall woman with a severe expression, approached the center of the deck. Her eyes scanned the silent crowd before locking onto my husband. "Derek," the agent stated, her voice carrying an undeniable booming authority that commanded the entire venue, "we have a federal warrant for your arrest." The whispers among the crowd erupted into a shocked, chaotic murmur. Lindsay grabbed Derek's arm, her eyes wide with terror. "There is a mistake," Derek choked out, holding his hands up in a desperate gesture of surrender. "I run a legitimate tourism outfit. My accountants handle the filings. You need to speak to my financial department. I am just the outfitter. I do not manage the ledgers." It was the exact cowardly defense I had anticipated. He was attempting to throw an unnamed bookkeeper under the bus to save his own skin, feigning the ignorance of a simple outdoorsman. "You are the sole proprietor and acting chief executive," the agent countered, pulling a thick folder from her leather satchel. She flipped it open, revealing a familiar document bearing his fresh signature. 2 days ago, you signed a legally binding assumption of liability during a recorded mediation session. You explicitly claimed total, undisputed operational and financial control of this enterprise, waiving your right to contest any retroactive liabilities. You cemented your personal accountability for every single dollar that flowed through these accounts. Derek stared at the paper. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The trap I had laid in the sterile conference room was not just about commercial debt. It was a perfectly engineered snare designed to strip away his plausible deniability in a federal investigation. He had volunteered to take the fall. "You are being charged with multiple counts of wire fraud and severe federal tax evasion," the agent continued, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from her belt. "For the past 3 years, you systematically diverted the federal payroll tax withholdings of your employees. You funneled stolen government funds into a series of shell corporations to purchase luxury real estate." The silence that followed her declaration was deafening. The wealthy investors looked at each other in horror, realizing their capital was tied to a federal crime scene, but the true devastation unfolded on the faces of the river guides. The blue-collar workers, the men and women who risked their lives on the rapids, lowered their serving trays. They stared at the boss they had defended online. The realization washed over the local community like a frigid wave. Derek had not just cheated on his wife, he had reached into their paychecks and robbed their social safety nets. He had stolen their Medicare and Social Security contributions to buy a penthouse for his mistress. The poetic justice was a symphony of perfectly orchestrated retribution. The Appalachian community values fierce loyalty and hard work above all else. Stealing from the hands of the working class is an unforgivable sin in a mountain town. The very people who had whispered about me in the bakery and glared at me in the hardware store now looked at Derek with pure, unfiltered disgust. His social empire crumbled into dust right before his eyes. "Please," Derek begged, tears welling in his eyes as the agent secured his wrists behind his back. The metallic click of the handcuffs echoed across the wooden deck. "I can fix this. I can pay it back. I just need a loan." "You cannot borrow your way out of a federal indictment," I said, stepping forward so I was the last thing he saw before the agents led him away. "You built a hollow kingdom on the backs of the people who trusted you. Now you get to watch the dam break." The agents escorted the weeping, broken man down the steps and shoved him into the back of a waiting SUV. Lindsay stood alone on the deck, sobbing uncontrollably as the wealthy investors frantically dialed their corporate lawyers, desperate to sever their ties to the toxic enterprise. The local elite scattered, fleeing the scene like rats abandoning a sinking ship. I stood on the polished river stone patio, the crisp autumn wind catching the edge of my tailored blazer. I did not feel a shred of pity. I felt only the immense, refreshing weight of pristine, undeniable justice. The chaotic rapids had been permanently silenced, and I remained the unbroken structure, standing triumphantly above the waterline. The federal justice system operates with a terrifying and mechanical efficiency. 3 days after the raid on the riverbank, Derek stood before a federal magistrate in a drab, windowless courtroom in downtown Charleston. He wore a standard-issued orange jumpsuit. The bespoke charcoal fabric of his prior life had been confiscated during intake, stripping away his false armor. The prosecuting attorney presented a staggering mountain of documented evidence to the judge. They highlighted the stolen payroll taxes, showing the direct routing numbers from the tourism company to the luxury condominium. But the final nail in his legal coffin was the digital extortion demand he sent me after the charity gala. By putting a financial threat in writing, he proved he possessed a retaliatory and dangerous mindset. The magistrate did not hesitate. Citing the severe scale of the fraud and the explicit blackmail attempts, the judge denied bail. Derek was remanded directly to a high-security holding facility to await trial. He looked over his shoulder, searching the wooden gallery benches for a familiar face, but the room was barren. Lindsay was conspicuously absent. The pregnant mistress had witnessed the federal raid from the edge of the wooden deck and processed the terrifying reality of her situation with remarkable speed. She recognized that her luxurious lifestyle was built entirely on a federal crime scene. She was tied to a penniless felon carrying millions of dollars in restitution debt. The luxury condo in Charleston, funded by stolen money, would soon be seized by government auditors. Survival instinct is a powerful motivator. Before the sun set on the day of the raid, Lindsay packed her designer bags, abandoned the lease, and vanished across state lines. She fled West Virginia to avoid accessory charges, leaving Derek to face the federal prosecutors entirely alone. His hollow empire had evaporated, and the loyalty he purchased with stolen funds disappeared the second the well ran dry. With Derek securely locked inside a concrete cell, I turned my attention to the final remaining debt. Gail had received her 48-hour eviction notice during our mediation session. The timer had officially expired. The Appalachian morning air carried a thick, damp chill as I drove my modest sedan up the winding, forested road toward her generational mountain estate. The property was a sprawling, historic timber home nestled deep in the woods. It served as a prominent symbol of her family lineage and her aristocratic social standing within the local community. It was the exact same house where she had proudly signed the blank guarantor forms years ago, unknowingly trading her sanctuary for her son's hubris. I did not arrive alone. 2 county sheriff deputies parked their marked cruisers at the base of the driveway, their lights reflecting off the wet pavement. I stepped out of my vehicle wearing a tailored wool trench coat, holding the finalized deed of foreclosure authorized by my blind trust. We walked up the stone pathway together. The lead deputy knocked heavily on the front door. Gail opened it a fraction, her face pale and drawn. She wore a silk bathrobe, her eyes darting between the armed officers and the crisp legal documents in my hand. "The property is now the legal possession of Appalachian Holdings," the deputy stated, his tone professional and uncompromising. "You have 10 minutes to gather your remaining personal items and vacate the premises." Gail stared at the officers, her jaw trembling. She looked past them, her gaze locking onto my face. The haughty pride that had defined her entire existence fractured into 1,000 fragile pieces. She opened her mouth to argue, to invoke her family name, to demand respect from the local authorities. But the deputies were bound by strict property law, not Appalachian nepotism. They stepped onto the threshold, silently gesturing for her to move. I walked past her, stepping into the grand foyer of the home my holding company now owned. I turned and stood on the elevated wraparound porch, leaning against the sturdy wooden railing. The autumn rain began to fall, turning the long dirt driveway into a slick, muddy path. Gail emerged from the front door hauling 2 heavy, vintage leather suitcases. They were identical to the luggage she had tossed onto my lawn just weeks prior. The visual symmetry of the moment was flawless. She struggled to lift the bags, her expensive shoes slipping on the wet stone steps. The deputies watched in silence, offering no assistance to a woman being lawfully evicted. She reached the bottom of the stairs and began the long, humiliating walk toward the street. The wheels of her heavy suitcases caught in the thick Appalachian mud, dragging and sticking. She was forced to pull them by the handles, her silk bathrobe dragging through the puddles. I watched her from the porch, my expression a mask of cool, clinical detachment. I did not hurl insults, I did not raise my voice or gloat over her misfortune. The sheer reality of her hauling her ruined belongings through the mud provided an exquisite, silent vindication. She was permanently exiled from the wealthy community she once ruled, forced to relocate to a cramped, low-income apartment on the outskirts of town. She had orchestrated my public humiliation, and now she was enduring her own total ruin. When her figure disappeared at the end of the road, I turned and walked back inside the silent, empty house. The sprawling estate felt vast and still. I stepped into the main living room. Standing tall in the corner was a magnificent antique grandfather clock. Gail had boasted about that specific heirloom during countless holiday dinners, claiming it was the beating heart of her family legacy. I stood in the center of the room, listening to the steady, rhythmic ticking of the brass pendulum. The sound echoed through the vacant halls. It did not represent her family anymore. It represented my precise, calculated victory. I claimed the heirloom as a permanent fixture for my own future office, a quiet reminder of the day I stopped a chaotic river and built an impenetrable dam. The residential foreclosure was just one facet of the debt recovery. The next morning, I initiated the systematic dismantling of Mountain Rapids Adventures. As the primary secured creditor, my blind trust possessed the legal authority to liquidate all corporate assets to satisfy the defaulted toxic loan. I did not attempt to salvage the tourism operation. I tore it apart piece by piece. I hired commercial auctioneers to sell off the extensive fleet of commercial shuttle buses, the customized river rafts, and the highly expensive safety gear. Rival outfitters eagerly purchased the equipment at premium prices. I sold the riverfront headquarters building to a commercial real estate developer, capitalizing on the prime location along the gorge. The liquidation process was a masterclass in ruthless efficiency. Every transaction funneled direct capital back into Appalachian Holdings. By the time the final commercial transport van was auctioned, I had not only recouped the initial investment used to purchase the shadow debt, but I had generated a robust, undeniable profit for my trust. The empire Derek built on lies, stolen tax dollars, and forged signatures was erased from the map. The physical equipment was dispersed, the headquarters repurposed, and the fraudulent ledgers handed over to federal prosecutors for his upcoming sentencing hearing. The Appalachian town returned to its normal rhythm, but a distinct shift had occurred beneath the surface. The locals who had participated in the digital smear campaign against me quietly deleted their venomous posts. The bakery owners and hardware store clerks who had offered me cold shoulders realized the quiet, unassuming energy analyst was actually a lethal corporate predator. Fear replaced their gossip, respect replaced their disdain. I had restored the balance of power, ensuring no one in the forested hills of Morgantown would ever underestimate me again. 6 months passed. The brutal Appalachian winter thawed, giving way to the vibrant, deceptive green of spring across the West Virginia hills. I sat behind a sleek, polished obsidian desk in the corner office of my newly established firm in downtown Morgantown. The space was devoid of the chaotic, rustic clutter that defined my former life. It featured stark lines, soundproof glass, and an atmosphere of disciplined order. The only sound disrupting the quiet hum of the climate control was the steady, rhythmic ticking of a vintage grandfather clock standing proudly against the far wall. Gail's prized family heirloom now kept time for a woman she had once tried to throw onto the street. Every tick was a measured reminder of a battle won through sheer, unemotional calculation. I did not return to my previous employer. Earning a corporate salary while making someone else rich no longer aligned with my trajectory. I launched Ironclad Resource Analytics, an independent environmental and energy auditing firm specializing in complex mineral rights and commercial forestry leases. The startup capital did not come from a bank loan or a venture capitalist. The venture was funded entirely by the liquidation of my ex-husband's hollow empire. The proceeds from selling his whitewater rafts, shuttle buses, and the prime riverfront real estate provided the exact seed money required to secure the top floor of this commercial high-rise. I had converted his deceit into my foundation. Growing up in the shadow of the struggling coal camps, I learned early that the world does not reward tears. When the mining companies shortchanged the workers, the men who wept or yelled in the streets achieved nothing. The men who survived were the ones who learned to read the fine print. I applied that exact childhood lesson to my marital collapse. Instead of sinking into despair when Derek handed his mother the power to humiliate me, I analyzed the structural weaknesses of his reality. I recruited Elias to construct an impenetrable legal fortress around my new enterprise. Ironclad Resource Analytics operated under the protective umbrella of Appalachian Holdings. My wealth was buried behind cascading layers of corporate privacy statutes. If a disgruntled energy baron or a ghost from my past ever tried to pierce the corporate veil, they would hit a solid wall of Delaware proxy laws. I was legally invisible and financially invincible. Society often dictates a very specific script for betrayed women. We are expected to fall apart. We are supposed to lean on our friends, attend therapy sessions to process the trauma, and slowly rebuild our shattered self-esteem over years of painful healing. The narrative demands that we act as the noble, wounded victim. I rejected that script entirely. When a toxic element attempts to destroy your peace, fighting back with raw emotion is a tactical error. Anger clouds judgment. Sorrow slows your reaction time. You do not argue with a parasite. You utilize detached, forensic precision to legally eradicate them from your ecosystem. I looked down at the immaculate surface of my desk. There were no framed photographs of a smiling couple. There were no remnants of the woman who had naively trusted a river guide to navigate her future. The grief that typically follows a divorce never materialized in my chest. Mourning requires the loss of something valuable, and Derek was merely a depreciating asset. He had spent years draining my resources, weaponizing my credit, and insulting my intelligence. Cutting him loose felt like excising a tumor. The surgical removal was painful for a brief moment, but the resulting health was exhilarating. I felt only the cold, refreshing weight of undisputed dominance over my own trajectory. The local dynamics in Morgantown had fundamentally shifted. The energy executives who once brushed past me at charity galas now requested appointments weeks in advance, eager to hire my firm to sanitize their contracts. The community members who had eagerly shared fabricated social media posts now lowered their eyes when I walked past their storefronts. They understood the terrifying speed with which I had dismantled a local golden boy. Respect in these mountain towns is rarely given freely. It must be extracted. By foreclosing on a generational estate and delivering a fraudster to the federal authorities, I had established a boundary no one dared to cross. As I sat in the climate-controlled comfort of my high-rise, reviewing a lucrative natural gas contract, my thoughts drifted briefly to the alternate realities playing out miles away. Lindsay was hiding in a different state, constantly looking over her shoulder, terrified that an auditor might link her to the stolen payroll taxes that funded her brief stint in luxury. Gail was confined to a cramped, low-income apartment, stripped of her aristocratic status, forced to navigate the twilight of her life without the sprawling mountain estate she had so foolishly mortgaged. They traded their comfort for a fleeting moment of arrogant cruelty. The exchange rate had bankrupted them all. I stood up from my leather chair and walked toward the expansive windows. The glass offered a panoramic view of the Monongahela River winding through the steep forested hills. The water looked dark and powerful, cutting through the ancient rock with effortless momentum. Derek used to brag about taming those waters. He built his entire persona around the illusion of conquering nature. But nature, much like a well-drafted legal contract, does not care about a man's ego. It flows where the path of least resistance allows, and it drowns anyone foolish enough to underestimate the undercurrents. I was not the river. I was the rock that broke the water. My journey from the muddy front lawn of my former home to this elevated executive suite required a deliberate suspension of empathy. Some might view the calculated destruction of a family as ruthless. I view it as necessary hygiene. If you allow deceit to fester within your perimeter, it will eventually consume your hard-earned stability. Derek introduced the infection when he forged my signature. He invited the decay when he stole from his blue-collar workers. I simply provided the cure. The cure involved a total, uncompromising financial amputation. The ticking of the grandfather clock synchronized with my steady pulse. The peace I had cultivated was pristine. The silence of my office was a testament to the boundaries I had drawn in steel and ink. I had successfully isolated every chaotic variable, ensuring my environment remained strictly under my jurisdiction. No one could enter my space without my explicit authorization. No hidden liabilities lurked in the fine print of my life. I returned to my desk, picking up a silver pen to sign off on a multi-million-dollar commercial forestry audit. The ink flowed smoothly across the page, binding another lucrative asset to my holding company. I had built an empire from the wreckage of a fraudulent marriage. I had transformed the darkest betrayal of my life into a masterclass in strategic acquisition. Suddenly, the quiet serenity of the afternoon was pierced by a sharp electronic chirp. The blinking light on my multi-line desk console indicated an incoming transmission. My executive assistant, a highly efficient professional hired for her discretion and sharp instincts, rarely interrupted my designated analytical blocks unless the matter required immediate, high-level attention. I placed the silver pen down, the metallic click echoing softly in the spacious room. I reached across the polished obsidian surface and pressed the glowing receiver button. The voice of my assistant filtered through the crisp, clear speaker, delivering a message that sought to reach across the impenetrable moat I had constructed. The past was attempting to make one final, desperate breach into my present. The blinking light on my desk console pulsed with a steady, rhythmic cadence. I pressed the silver receiver button, allowing the crisp voice of my executive assistant to fill the quiet expanse of my office. "Ms. Ross," my assistant stated, her tone maintaining a strict professional veneer but carrying a faint edge of hesitation, "there is an automated operator holding on line 1. It is a collect call originating from the Hazleton Federal Correctional Institution. The caller identified himself as Derek. Shall I disconnect the line?" I rested my hands on the smooth walnut surface of my desk. The name hung in the climate-controlled air, a fragile ghost attempting to rattle chains that had long since been severed. A weaker individual might have felt a spike in their heart rate or a sudden rush of vindictive triumph. I felt only a mild clinical curiosity. I wanted to hear the final desperate frequency of a neutralized threat. "Route the call," I instructed. The console clicked. A pre-recorded metallic voice informed me of the charges and the origin of the facility. I pressed the designated key to accept. The line connected with a hollow, static-filled hiss, carrying the distinct, echoing acoustics of a crowded concrete room. "Abigail," a voice rasped through the speaker. It did not sound like the booming, confident outfitter who used to command attention at local taverns and charity galas. The bravado had been thoroughly stripped away. The man on the other end of the line sounded small, fractured, and drowning in genuine terror. Please do not hang up, Derek begged, his breath hitching audibly over the terrible connection. I only get a few minutes on this phone. I had to trade my commissary meals just to secure a spot in the line. You have to listen to me. I have nobody else to call. I did not offer a greeting. I did not speak a single syllable. I simply listened to the frantic, unraveling rhythm of his panic. They denied my bail request again, he sobbed, the wet, ragged sound of his weeping amplifying the pathetic nature of his position. The public defender they assigned to me is useless. He is an overworked kid straight out of law school. He told me the prosecutors have an airtight paper trail for the payroll taxes. He wants me to sign a plea agreement for 15 years. 15 years, Abigail. I will not survive a decade and a half in this place. The cell is freezing. The lights never turn off. I am terrified every single second of the day. He paused, waiting for a response, desperate for a sliver of the empathy I used to offer so freely during our marriage. When the silence stretched unbroken, he pivoted, falling back on the only survival tactic he knew. He attempted to extract resources. I heard what you did with the rafting equipment, Derek rushed on, his words tumbling over each other in a frantic cascade. I know you liquidated the company and started a new auditing firm. My lawyer told me you were operating out of a high-rise in downtown Morgantown. You have capital now. You have an entire legal team. You have Elias. The audacity of his request materialized through the static. I need you to hire Elias to represent me, Derek pleaded, his voice cracking into a high, strained pitch. You have the funds to secure a top-tier defense. You can afford to fix this. I know I hurt you. I know I made terrible, unforgivable choices, but I am begging you to remember the years we shared. We built a life together. You cannot just let me rot inside a federal cage. Pay for my defense, and I swear I will spend the rest of my life working to repay you. I will do whatever you want. Please, Abigail, save me. He finished his desperate monologue, leaving nothing but the hum of the prison phone line and the distant shouts of other inmates in the background. He had not called to apologize for forging my signature. He had not called to express genuine remorse for stealing the social safety nets of his hard-working employees. He called because he still viewed me as an exploitable resource. Even while wearing a federally issued jumpsuit, trapped inside a concrete holding facility, his fundamental nature remained unchanged. He saw a wealthy woman and instinctively tried to figure out how to siphon her wealth. I looked up at the antique grandfather clock standing against the far wall of my office. The brass pendulum swung left, then right. I gave him exactly 3 seconds of my time. 1 second to acknowledge the profound, satisfying symmetry of his ruin. The man who had tried to leave me homeless and penniless was now begging for scraps from the very empire he inadvertently funded. 2 seconds to observe the gray waters of the Monongahela River winding through the forested hills outside my window. The current flowed steadily onward, entirely unbothered by the obstacles it had carved through over the centuries. 3 seconds to savor the pristine, untouchable sanctuary I had engineered. I did not utter a single word of forgiveness. I did not offer a parting insult. I reached across the obsidian desk and pressed my finger down on the glowing red receiver button. The line went dead, severing the connection with a sharp, definitive click. I picked up the silver pen resting next to my notepad. I pressed the intercom button to reach my assistant. "Contact the telecommunications provider," I directed, my tone smooth and unwavering. "Instruct them to implement a permanent, hard-coded block on any incoming calls originating from the Bureau of Prisons. If any correspondence arrives via physical mail bearing a correctional facility return address, shred it unopened." "Consider it done, Ms. Ross," my assistant replied promptly. I released the button and returned my attention to the complex energy contract waiting on my desk. The interruption was over. The ghost had been permanently exorcised from the machine. Modern society conditions women to adhere to a very specific, restrictive script when navigating betrayal. We are taught to be the bigger person. We are instructed to process our trauma through tears, to seek closure through dialogue, and to ultimately offer grace to the individuals who harmed us. We are expected to maintain our polite, nurturing demeanor, even while standing in the wreckage of our own lives. The cultural narrative suggests that walking away without offering forgiveness is a sign of bitterness or emotional immaturity. That script is a trap. It is a social mechanism designed to keep predators comfortable and victims compliant. Forgiveness is not a mandatory toll you must pay to travel the road to recovery. Some actions do not warrant grace. Some betrayals are so profound, so deeply rooted in parasitic greed, that offering compassion is merely an invitation for further exploitation. Setting an ironclad boundary and enforcing it with ruthless, forensic precision is not an act of cruelty. It is the highest, most pure form of self-respect. When my former mother-in-law threw my luggage onto the wet Appalachian grass, she expected me to shrink. When my husband forged my signature to secure a toxic commercial loan, he expected me to blindly absorb the collateral damage. They mistook my quiet diligence for weakness, failing to realize that the same attention to detail required to audit a multi-million-dollar coal lease can easily be weaponized to dismantle a fraudulent human being. I did not scream on the front porch. I did not engage in a public mudslinging contest on social media. I retreated to the shadows, gathered my empirical data, and allowed their own staggering hubris to build the very cage that eventually locked them away. I let the federal government and the private debt markets serve as the blunt instruments of my retribution, keeping my own hands perfectly clean. I stood up from my desk and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. The late afternoon sun broke through the dense cloud cover, casting a warm, golden hue over the rolling hills of West Virginia. The rugged landscape reflected my own internal architecture. It was resilient, enduring, and capable of weathering the most severe storms without losing its structural integrity. I had transformed a hostile domestic eviction into a thriving corporate enterprise. I took the shattered remnants of a deceitful marriage and used them as the raw materials to construct an unbreachable fortress. I possessed immense wealth, a pristine reputation, and the intoxicating freedom of knowing that no one could ever access my inner sanctum without my explicit consent. The story of my survival is not a tragic tale of a wronged wife. It is a blueprint for strategic, emotionless reclamation. When the people you trust attempt to pull the rug out from under you, do not waste your energy crying over the loss of balance. Learn the mechanics of the floorboards, study the foundation, find the exact structural vulnerability in their arrogant posture, and pull the entire house down around them. Have you ever experienced a profound betrayal that forced you to reinvent your entire reality? Have you ever looked a toxic person in the eye and realized their underestimation of your intelligence was their fatal flaw? I want to hear your stories of resilience and strategic victories. Share your experiences in the comments below. If you found power in this journey, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more narratives about claiming your worth and delivering uncompromising justice. Remember to always read the fine print, trust your own intellect, and never apologize for protecting your peace with relentless precision. The image of a mother dragging her ruined luggage through the cold, wet Appalachian mud is not merely a portrait of financial ruin. It is the ultimate tragic culmination of a parenting failure decades in the making. When we look at the shattered remnants of Derek's life, the federal indictment, the foreclosed generational estate, the abandoned pregnant mistress, it is tempting to focus solely on the mechanics of the corporate trap that caught him. But the true tragedy did not begin in a sterile arbitration room or a shadow lender's ledger. It began years earlier, at a kitchen table, under the guise of unconditional maternal love. In American culture, particularly within the traditional family structure, we hold a deeply romanticized view of parental devotion. We are taught that a mother's primary duty is to shield her child from the harsh, unforgiving edges of the world. We celebrate the fiercely protective parent who steps in to smooth the path, to erase the obstacles, and to ensure their child's success at any cost. But the story of Derek and Gail reveals the dark, insidious underbelly of this philosophy. Gail believed she was being a devoted mother when she praised her son's every move, insulted those who challenged him, and blindly signed blank guarantor forms to fund his whitewater rafting enterprise. She thought she was building his confidence. In truth, she was slowly, methodically stripping away his moral spine. Raising a child with true emotional awareness and fairness requires a parent to perform the most agonizing task of all, allowing the child to experience the profound discomfort of their own failures. Honesty is not an inherent trait. It is a muscle that must be exercised under the heavy weight of accountability. When Gail chose to protect Derek from the consequences of his minor mistakes, she bypassed the essential crucible of character development. She raised a golden child who believed the rules of society and basic human decency did not apply to him. He learned that whenever he stumbled, his mother would be there to rewrite the narrative, to blame the obstacle rather than his own missteps. This toxic enabling bred a profound entitlement. Derek felt entirely justified forging his wife's signature and stealing the hard-earned payroll taxes of his blue-collar river guides because he was conditioned to believe his desires superseded the rights of everyone else. He was never taught family responsibility. He was only taught self-preservation. In the rugged, self-reliant landscape of the Appalachian Mountains, where men like Abigail's father sacrificed their lungs in the dark coal mines just to feed their families, Derek's hollow arrogance was an insult to the very concept of hard work. He possessed the aesthetic of a rugged outdoorsman, but beneath the flannel and the bespoke suits, he was a fragile, terrified boy who had never been forced to stand on his own 2 feet. As we unravel these complex, chilling human webs, we must confront the uncomfortable truths hiding within our own homes. If you have ever had to unlearn the toxic habits of your upbringing, or if you are committed to raising children with fierce, uncompromising integrity rather than hollow entitlement, take a moment to join our community. Hit the like button and subscribe to Sarah Told Stories. We explore the profound depths of human behavior every week, shedding light on the silent battles fought behind closed doors. The most unsettling realization drawn from this saga is a viewpoint that actively defies conventional parenting wisdom. Society whispers that family must stand together no matter the cost, that a mother's love should serve as an impenetrable shield against the world. I argue the exact opposite. Unconditional protection is the highest, most destructive form of parental betrayal. By constantly shielding a child from the fire, you virtually guarantee that they will one day burn the entire house down. True, enduring love requires you to let them touch the hot stove. It demands that you let them fail a test they did not study for, that you force them to apologize when they inflict pain, and that you require them to pay their own debts. If you do not introduce your children to the sharp sting of accountability within the safe confines of your home, the world will eventually introduce them to it in a federal courtroom. A traditional family structure is not defined by Sunday dinners, matching holiday photographs, or the blind defense of a bloodline. A true family is a forge. It is the place where honesty is tested and emotional awareness is cultivated through friction. Abigail possessed this strength because her father showed her the brutal reality of the coal contracts. She learned that survival requires vigilance, fairness, and a relentless grip on the truth. She was equipped to navigate a treacherous world because she was never lied to about its dangers. Derek, swaddled in his mother's endless excuses, walked into a corporate slaughterhouse believing he was invincible, simply because his mother had always told him he was. We do not owe our children a painless existence. We owe society adults who do not inflict pain on others. As the antique grandfather clock ticks in the corner of a silent, newly claimed office, it measures more than just the passing of hours. It measures the inevitable, unrelenting march of consequences. The pendulum swings, indifferent to ego, wealth, or legacy. It leaves us with a lingering, unsettling question that echoes long after the dust settles. When you look at the children you are raising, or the legacy you are building, are you forging a fortress of character capable of withstanding the storm? Or are you merely constructing a beautiful, fragile house of cards, desperately hoping the wind never blows? Because eventually, the wind always reaches the mountains, and when the knock finally comes at the door, you must ask yourself, whose name will be written on the ruin?